All right, everybody. I know got a lot to do and time is fleeting, so let's go ahead and call this meeting to order. It is 5 p.m. on November 10th. I'd like to welcome you all here tonight. Real quick introductions. We have Directors Clausen, Eastham, Etsy, Godwin, Malone, and Williams here. We have Superintendent Matt Degner and Recording Secretary Kim Colvin. A reminder to everybody that's as an attendee, we will not be live answering the Q&A or chat questions, but there will be time for community comment in a little bit. We do have several board members who are kind of double booked tonight with an equity workshop. So we are going to kind of move through. And when we get to looking at the agenda, I'm going to suggest that we move up the return to learn. But before we get to all that, we are going to start with our student representative updates from our various schools. And I saw most of them were on, so let's start with City High and Catherine Gertis.
Hi, just some updates for City High. We've had a really good month. We finally voted on homecoming royalty with Joe Bacon and Elliot Murray being our homecoming royalty this year. In the state XC meet, 2 girls ran individually and the boys XC team placed 9th. Several Little Hawks also qualified for the state swimming meet that is taking place this weekend. The Little Hawk, our newspaper, won the All Iowa News Team of the Year award and were an NSPA Pacemaker finalist. The school also received all-state music results this week with 8 band students, 9 orchestra students, and 3 choir students qualifying for all-state. And finally, drama is planning an virtual production of Little Women. So overall, a very good month.
Fantastic, thank you, appreciate it. Let's see, next up from West High, Paras Basuk, I believe is here.
Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Paras Basuk, and I'm the student representative from West High. Since October, West has been busy. We've been settling into the school year by celebrating our extracurricular activities. So Theater West has announced and cast its 3 productions for the school year, 2 of which will be radio plays, as well as the musical Into the Woods. And the student-produced Innovative Theater Club has also cast its production. The Iowa City West Library has a book club, and they've held their first 2 meetings in October. And the library has set up a book pickup station for online students to check out books. The West Side Story newspaper was named the All Iowa News Team of the Year, and the Trojan Epic Yearbook was named 2nd place Yearbook of the Year. Additionally, the first West Side Story newspaper of the school year was published in October and distributed through no-contact home deliveries by student volunteers. Many other student groups like West High's Gender and Sexuality Alliance called Colors Club and the Anime and Japanese Culture Club also started meeting last month. West High Big Dreamers, a new club this year, will host their first event on November 17th and 18th, where they will bring in West alumni to discuss their careers and dreams with students. A total of 50 student musicians were accepted into the 2020 All-State Band, Orchestra, or Choir, or were accepted as alternates this year. Although there will be no performance in Ames this year, the honor is a testament to their hard work through the unique online audition process. As the fall sports seasons come to a close, West High golf, cross country, swim, volleyball, football, and dance teams have all found great success. The girls swim team winning regionals for the 3rd year in a row, and the boys cross country team qualifying for state are among their many achievements. The West High Thanksgiving food drive is also underway and is accepting non-perishable food donations to share a meal with a West High family. Finally, the 2020 presidential election yielded unprecedented voter turnout and delayed reporting of election results. To accommodate the uncertainty and potential stress surrounding this unique election, West High offered students designated safe spaces to process on the days following Election Day. Thank you all for having me. Have a nice night.
Thanks, Paras. I appreciate you being here. Next up from Tate, we have Chris Platt.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Good evening, board members. My name is Crystal Platt. I'm a junior at Tate High School. I have a few items to share, and we'll start with the results of our student climate survey. Once every trimester, students at Tate are asked to complete a climate survey. This feedback allows to evaluate our effectiveness in meeting the social and emotional needs of students and addressing issues of equity. The results of the trimester 1 survey indicate that students overwhelmingly feel heard and seen at Tate. The vast majority report feeling safe and report that teachers care about them and regularly communicate progress. We can always do better. The climate survey is one tool we can use to make sure that we are meeting the needs of all students. And now a bit of student council news. In keeping with the yearly tradition, student council once again sponsored boograms during Halloween as a way for students and staff to send love to appear at Tate. Over the course of a few days, students had an opportunity to write a note to someone special and have it delivered along with a piece of candy. Every student at Tate received a boogram, and it really lifted spirits. We want to thank Student Council for taking the time to recognize the importance of reminding students to express kindness and thanks and giving others an opportunity to hear it. Tate's core values are caring, ownership, respect, and responsibility. Every day, Tate staff members work hard to instill core values in our students. This year, the staff decided to recognize a Core Warrior of the Month, a student who exudes core values on a daily basis. Staff member Caitlin Hoskins nominated me, Crystal Platt, for their big heart and the kindness she has shown to new students. Congratulations to Chris for being such an example to others, especially during these challenging times. We are very proud of her. And lastly, students in family consumer science classes are thoroughly enjoying the new cooking and sewing space in our school. In the past, cooking was not a part of our program because we didn't have access to stoves. But so far this year, students have thoroughly enjoyed researching recipes and learning cooking techniques. So far, they have made banana bread, French toast, cookies, and chili. Other students in the program are busy researching and sewing face masks that they can wear or give to family and friends. It's been so awesome to smell cooking in the halls and to see students take pride in their cooking and sewing accomplishments. Thank you again for supporting this important renovation to our school. So that's all I have for this evening. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak.
Thanks, Chris, and congrats on your honor. Well done. Kim from Liberty, we have Bia Caskey.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, my name is Bia Caskey, and I'm Liberty's NHS co-vice president, and I'm here to talk to you about some great updates we've had at Liberty over the past few weeks. First, to start out, we have a lot of sports news. Our girls volleyball team was crowned Mississippi Valley champions for the second year in a row and made history by having their second appearance at the 5A state tournament result in a second place finish. Everyone at Liberty is super proud of how they accomplished this season with an impressive 23-3 record, and we're super excited to see the rest of their sports team succeed. Our boys and girls cross country programs represented Liberty extremely well at state on October 30th. The boys placed 6th place overall with bow and grip, leading the team with a strong 18th place finish. The girls team did not qualify as a team, but we had 3 individuals qualify, and Ashlyn Cleaney led the team with placing 9th place, Camille Mack with 36, and Corey Mack placing 59th. We're all super proud of them. The Liberty Trojan girls swim team also finished out their season strong with a state happening this weekend, and they finished regionals last weekend. We have Carly Wilkins, Colby Reese, and Michaela Hijack all advancing for the state meet, and we're all super excited to watch them succeed this weekend. Continuing on with sports, the boys and girls basketball and bowling team, as well as the boys wrestling and swim team, are gearing up for their winter seasons. And the music department, we're super proud of all 29 peers who qualified for the all-state concert with band, choir, and orchestra. Although the in-person festival is canceled, we recognize their hard work and we appreciate the atmosphere they bring to our school. Liberty staff, students, parents, and teachers have been working diligently to help support many opportunities on our new platforms this year. Many club leaders are currently preparing to support a digital club fair next week to continue to encourage the involvement of students at Liberty in different ways, academically and extracurricularly. This Monday, NHS had its first Zoom session of the year for our homework help program. It was very successful. This program allows for many members of NHS to help fellow students organize their schoolwork and aid with specialized subjects that they know best. Although this year is atypical, the energy around learning and community has been extraordinarily strong at Liberty, and we are very proud of what we have accomplished. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Pia. Appreciate you being here. We will move on to our ICEA update. Brady?
Thank you, President Eystone, Vice President Malone, directors, good evening. For those joining us tonight who may not know me, my name is Brady Shutt. I am a teacher in the district and I'm the president of the Iowa City Education Association. I want to start tonight with a special thank you to our school nurses for their Herculean efforts to keep our students, staff, and community safe and healthy. They are literally working around the clock on our behalf and are doing so with the greatest level of patience, kindness, empathy, expertise, and grace. Among their many tasks is communicating with their colleagues, us, and our families. And tonight I respectfully ask that as we work with our nurses, that each of us responds with the same kindness, patience, and grace we receive from them. More broadly, on behalf of ICA, I also want to publicly recognize the tireless efforts of all of our educators in the district. I see some new panelists. I got to give a shout out to Eliza and Liz, two of our amazing administrators who are just fantastic instructional leaders. There are many things to be proud of as an educator in the Iowa City schools, and our collaboration and focus on student engagement and growth certainly rise to the top of that list. The challenges we are facing are great, but our resolve and dedication are even greater. It is hard to convey what it means to be an educator in the public schools, but I'll tell you, the public, and I know the board knows this and lives this, but custodians, nutrition service workers, paraeducators, administrators, teachers, all of us, every single one of us is focused on helping our students. And there's no easy playbook on this. And I want to just to my colleagues, I know that these are incredible challenges, and I just have the utmost respect for the work that I see happening in our schools and our online learning community every single week. And I finally want to give a special thanks to Interim Superintendent Matt Degner and his team on our collaboration around our return to learn plans. We've remained in close communication throughout the fall, and that has certainly been true in the last week. None of these decisions is easy, and to my knowledge, no one has produced a playbook for how to proceed, or if they have, they haven't sent it to us. ICEA does support the application for the waiver from the Iowa Department of Education and the use of our decision-making matrix. And we can speak more about that later in the meeting if needed. We do urge our community to come together and practice physical distancing, good hygiene, and the wearing of masks so that together we can slow the community spread of COVID-19. A final thank you to our school board and all of our teams for their tireless work and leadership since March. Thank you.
Thank you, Brady. Appreciate that. All right, now we can move on to community comment. As a reminder, if you would like to make comments tonight, you can use the raise hand function and I will call your name and Kim will give you the rights to speak and you will have 4 minutes to do so. So we'll move into that now. Kim, Amy Seidel has had her hand up for a while. I don't know if Amy took her hand down because she doesn't want to speak, or do you need to unmute to speak?
Hello?
Hello.
Yeah, I did not mean to have my hand up. I apologize.
Okay, thank you. That's all right. No worries. We can move on, Kim, to Mary Murphy.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, Mary.
Awesome. So my name is Mary Murphy. I'm a parent who resides in Iowa City. I understand ICCSD has hired a former Marengo police officer turned substitute teacher to be your care assessment coordinator, and that ICCSD is proposing to increase surveillance on students by purchasing additional services from Securely. The surveillance would involve 24-hour surveillance of things like email, Facebook, Twitter use, etc. on when students use their Chromebook. It's unclear whether Securely will grab a student's personal information If a student plugs a personal device in, like a cell phone, into the school Chromebook, one of Securely's competitors reportedly does this, which raises huge concerns about administrators being provided with students' pictures and deeply personal information. You propose to fund this added surveillance with funding from a community-oriented policing or COPS grant from the Federal Justice Department. A vendor's services are not free if students pay with their personal data. I oppose adding these Securely services. The district's not legally required to purchase them. I informed Matt Degner of my opposition this past summer. I did not find Securely's fear-based sales presentation compelling, and there is no research that supports the efficacy of these types of services. A school is a government, and 24-hour surveillance of students' Chromebooks is government overreach. The lesson you'll be teaching students is, one, they won't be critical thinkers about what data they do put out there because you'll just be policing it. And also you're normalizing surveillance by a government. Further, students who don't use their Chromebooks at school or students who do not use their Chromebooks outside of school are at an advantage and will be subject to less surveillance, which is an equity issue. Online bullying is a serious problem, but teach students to find their voice and stand up for themselves. Connect them to responsible adults in school, which is a better use of time. Several years ago, members opposed buying the Raptor system because it would turn over personal information about families. Now you may have already turned over such information to Securely, because and Securely has sent me an advertisement in the past. False positives are a huge concern because if the police show up in the middle of the night at a student's home, it has the potential to be much more traumatizing for students and their families than whatever Securely perceived the students' issues were. I opted out of directory information, and ICCSD doesn't have my permission to share this with Securely. I don't believe their workers are highly qualified based on the job ad I saw online. My own kids would qualify. The administration has presented no evidence. There's actually a plan for what to do with any information that is provided. Surely a plan should be presented first. My high school has only 4 guidance counselors for almost 2,000 students, around 1,700. How are you going to review and address disparate impacts against underrepresented groups? What's the plan? You're being asked to approve a 3-year agreement, but there's no contract on the agenda, only a pricing quotation, which is unclear in some marketing material. I do realize you're unpaid volunteers. I thank you, but please exercise your fiduciary duty and include a contract as part of the board information packet so you and the public can review it. And if there's an open records exception, you can waive it. Be transparent. I also oppose the creation of a database by ICCSD and its care assessment coordinator. There are no provisions yet for how information can be corrected, what due process students will get who end up on it. We have many students who apply for government jobs, run for office, and need security clearance. It's unclear what you're doing with any data you put in it and how it can go away after a period of time. To conclude, students should not leave most of their privacy rights at the schoolhouse door. They should not lose their due process rights at the schoolhouse door. And the ability to buy services from an ed tech vendor under a grant doesn't mean you should actually do it. Please do not support Securely and at least get the contract. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mary. All right, Kim, next up, we have Jade Roquer. Jade, if you unmute, you are free to speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can. Go ahead.
Okay, hi. I'm actually Aurora Roguer using my sister's phone, but I'm a senior on the West High and Liberty High swim team, and I just wanted to use my time here today to say that our state championships are this weekend, November 13th through 14th, and we're getting ready to do some really big things. So with that, I really hope we are able and given the opportunity to swim this weekend. We have taken a lot of the necessary safety precautions like constantly wearing masks, social distancing, and self-quarantining besides going to school and practice. So while I understand the concern of COVID, I really hope that we can finish our final season off in the way that we deserve because we've worked so hard. and hopefully we'll be able to find a way to like show what we've done. Thank you. Okay, hello, I'm Jade Roger. As a West High swimmer, I'm hoping to have my last meet this weekend by being able to stay on hybrid for another week. My team and I have been doing everything we can to stay safe. We make sure that we are always wearing masks and staying socially distanced from others. Ending our season because of switching to 100% online would be an awful way to finish. So I hope you will take it into consideration all of our efforts we have put in to get to where we are today and allow us to finish out strong. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next up, Kim, we have Katie Kettleson.
Hi there. I'm sorry. I wasn't aware that I would be speaking today and I wasn't planning to.
Well, you have a chance if you'd like, otherwise we can move on.
Go ahead and move on. Thank you.
All right. All right, Kim, we'll move on. It says Jamie. I don't have a last name on there.
I wasn't speaking either. Sorry about that. I don't know if I raised my hand accidentally.
All right, thank you. I think we had someone, Nora Berner had a hand raised earlier, and I wasn't sure if that was a mistake or not. I guess if you would like to speak, you have the chance.
They have an issue with the unmuting because I did not touch it. Sorry.
Are you interested in speaking or?
I'm not. I'm listening tonight. I really appreciate your hard work though. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much. With that, Kim, I think we are through with our community comments. So we're going to move on to the agenda approval. And as I mentioned, I would like to move the return to learn line item up to right after consent, and including prior to any items that are pulled. I think we need to get that conversation as far done as we can while we still have all of our board members. So if that is acceptable to everyone, I would entertain a motion with that change for our agenda.
I move that we approve the agenda with the change of moving return to learn immediately after consent and before any pulled items.
I'd second that motion. And Sean, I have a question before we have a vote, if you don't mind.
On the agenda?
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
Sure. We had an invitation to attend an emergency joint entities meeting, actually in 2 days. Do we need to put that on an agenda, or do we not need to put that on tonight's agenda?
I don't believe we need to have it on tonight's agenda. It will be a posted meeting. I believe it was kind of put together by the city of Iowa City, and the agenda will be posted on, whatever website they have, just like it would any other joint entities meeting. So,
okay.
It came out today, so it has 40 hours prior to the meeting. So I think we're okay there.
Okay, thanks very much.
I got that right, Kim? I saw you nodding.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we have a motion and a second on the agenda. Unless there's further discussion, Kim, I think we can vote.
Online voting is open.
I'm an aye on that, Kim. I just got logged in.
Thank you, Director Clausen. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, so we can move into consent. Go through real quick if anybody had any questions or comments after reviewing the bills they want to share.
I looked at the bills and I didn't see anything that I had questions about.
I looked at the bills too and I didn't have any questions.
All right. Are there items that directors would like to pull from consent?
Yeah, I'd like to pull 11 and have a conversation about that.
All right. Anything else? All right, I would entertain a motion for consent minus item 11.
I move that we approve consent agenda minus item number 11, which is the securely 24 service item.
Second.
All right, Kim, I think we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, and as we modified our agenda, we're going to move right into our return to learn conversation. So I will turn it over to Matt.
Sure. Thanks, President Eystone. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, I'll start with some of the health and safety information that I'm sure is at the front of everybody's mind, and then we'll move into the presentation aspect, which is more on the learning component that we had talked about last time and some of the efforts the district's tried to undertake really since March, and then especially here since the start of the school year and some of the data we've used to drive those decisions. So first with the health and safety portion, we know that in our communications this week, you've seen that we've applied for permission to the state of Iowa to move to continuous remote learning. As we've seen numbers in the county and throughout the state continue to escalate, specifically around those positivity rates. That permission has been granted from the state of Iowa for us to do so. I think a couple things just before we get into kind of the admin recommendation around that. We do have some positive things I think to consider when we look at what we've been able to do in the hybrid experience. Our percentage of students positive as far as that's sitting at that 0.89%, our percentage of staff at 1.29. And of course, we'd like those numbers to be zero, and any positive case is not a win for us. But in comparison speaking, when we look at those in comparison with some other random samplings, those percentages have stayed low for us, which we feel like speaks to the continuous efforts of our staff and of our students in adherence to those health and safety mitigation efforts that we've tried to take in our buildings, and to our management strategy around quarantining individuals when we do learn of confirmed or presumed positive cases. We've also been able to provide 2 or 3 days of in-person instruction every week, and we know that's extremely valuable and where we want to be. Not all the way where we want to be, but we know that our teachers are best with students in front of them, and our students are the best with teachers in front of them. And so those have been highlights for us as we've worked through this hybrid experience. Some of the more concerning things, I referenced the Johnson County positivity rate sitting at 16.10% or 0.1%. We've had now 7 consecutive days over 10%. According to our metrics, we look for that 3 to 5 day time period as a marker for us that we want to see a pattern. We do have high numbers in some of our buildings where we have over 10% of our students and staff out to either confirm cases or quarantines. Contact tracing is becoming especially difficult for our nurses. I appreciated Brady's shout out to our nurse staff. They're just doing tremendous work for us and have really been working night and day in this contact tracing effort. Jess Jimerson and Kristen Peterson also deserve a lot of credit for their work in that. It's just constant, and it's to the point where we're starting to get to a tipping point where it's hard to keep up with right now for the amount of contact tracing that we're being expected to do on a consistent basis. And we are seeing several more quarantines. You guys see some of those emails and are aware of the amount of those that have started to take place. And of course, you see the numbers on our COVID dashboard as well about where those currently sit. And so tonight we come to you with the recommendation that we would begin online instruction on Monday, November 16th. And the reason we would like to wait until Monday really has a couple main considerations. One of those, we don't feel it's probably wise for our families to try to shift in the middle of the week and expect them to find childcare in the middle of the week and try to put that scenario together. So we feel like we need to create some space for them to do that. We also feel, out of respect to our teachers, that gives them some time to prepare for online instruction and switch modes on Monday. And so really with those two factors in our consideration, and of course the driver around that being the health and safety concern that we see, we do feel the need to transition to that online learning environment starting on Monday. That would take us through Thanksgiving break, and then we'd reevaluate and update you at the conversation on November 24th, the day before break, about what next steps would look like. And of course, we'd monitor the numbers and come back with a recommendation then about if we would need to continue in that or what our next steps would be. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or provide any additional detail they might have left out in the explanation there. Otherwise, I think that's the direction we anticipate heading. And once we're through those portion of the questions, like I said, then we can get into some more of the teach and learning aspects.
So Matt, this is Charlie. Can you talk about how we'll monitor student infection and staff infection as we're going, after we go to totally online?
Sure. So, I mean, we've been in that experience before, and we're still asking, to be notified when we learn of those situations. Obviously, quarantining for us is a little bit different in that scenario, but we would still ask for families and staff to notify us of those, because that's an important data tracking piece for us. We know that when we brought kids back on the site, I don't think that it was magic that more of those things happened, but we do know the awareness was greater for us when we did have kids and staff on site. And so I'm not also going to promise that it's going to be as perfect, but we would still want them sharing that information with us so we could accurately track that.
I have two questions really. One, there are kind of differences at the different schools with the number of staff and or students that are out, and so it's more difficult at some schools than others. So I want to make sure that we do have the flexibility if we're just unable to operate a school because there's too many absences, that it could happen Thursday or Friday and not wait till Monday if the case got bad enough at a school. And along with that, we've had communications asking for basically not doing the same thing everywhere. And this might be something Brady could speak to, where they've talked about keep the younger kids in the school or do it school specific based on their own numbers or other differences between schools. And so, that becomes an equity piece there as well. So I just like a little bit of comment on that. Matt, I'd let you start, but if kind of Brady wants to weigh in on that too, I'd hear that.
Sure. I think you hit a couple good points there, Sean. I mean, the first one, yes, if we had a building where we were concerned, and I do think we have a couple that were close to that concern about being able to just continue our normal operations and provide the level of service we need to our students. And for the staff to be able to do that, that could happen quicker than Monday. Right now, I don't have any reason to bring you information to say there is a building we need to do that with, but that could quickly change. We hear all hours of the day about confirmed positive cases. And if that would impact the staff in such a way, or a large amount of students, we could have to pull a campus down before we would get to Monday. And we do have some that are maybe at more elevated risk of that right now, just from the standpoint of, like I said, being able to provide the level of service in our operation that we need to in that aspect. So with the second one, I'm not exactly sure, Sean, there, if you're talking just kind of big picture about in the future, how we'd continue different grade levels or some different options we would consider. But of course, as a district, there are some different things we could do based on a K-6 high school model conversation. I don't think we'd feel comfortable suggesting any of those or recommending any of those right away tonight, but you've seen that in some other districts where maybe their elementary students have went every day and their high schools or their junior highs have been on a hybrid model or even online. And so our recommendation really tonight is for the whole district based on some of those overall health and safety factors we see. And I would tell you from analyzing the different building data, it's not a unique concern just to elementary students or junior high students or high school students or staff for that matter. It's in all of our buildings, and it's affecting all different pockets.
Hey Matt, question. This is Janet. Any lessons learned from the all online experience we had at the beginning of the school year that we would apply or anything that we would do differently going into a proposed next round of online learning for all of our students?
Sure, and that's a good question, Janet. I think that's some of what we'll talk about a little bit as we walk through the presentation around the learning aspect. But I do, as far as even some streamlined communication to families and students, and I think that's also a good reason for us to look at the Monday start to make sure that people are set and they're aware of how that gives us a chance with the B cohort of students at least to talk to them. And I would believe that our teachers even have done that in the last 2 A days about how they'll access their class. We have an opportunity here with some face-to-face time with our kids this week to make sure they're well prepared for beginning that online experience on Monday. And then I think even from an instructional practice standpoint, there's things our teachers learned and our administrators learned in those first couple weeks of doing online that we know will be improved upon as we go forward. But we also know there's significant concern about doing it online and that there's still going to be some difficulties and some challenges. It's weighing that health and safety piece right now against the need to do that. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in the presentation, but I do believe, even from a communication being prepared and accessibility standpoint for kids, that this week's been a benefit that way, that they could talk to the A kids on Monday, Tuesday a little bit about this potential change, and then we'll do that here the rest of the week as well.
Matt, if some of our families don't feel comfortable sending their kids to school for the remaining of the week, knowing we're going online on Monday, what would happen with their educational sort of activities if they opted to keep their kids at home? Would they have access to online activities, or would they just be out of luck until we start on Monday?
Well, I think they would want to communicate with their teachers that they weren't going to be in class Wednesday through Friday, and their teachers would sure do a great job, as they always do, of getting them whatever work they could, knowing that they would still be providing in-person instruction those 3 days. But I think you bring up an excellent point, Ruthina. If any of those students or families were uncomfortable coming to the building Wednesday through Friday and attending in-person classes, they could definitely keep their students at home. Just need to communicate with the school. We'd probably want to make sure there was nothing they wanted to get out of the school those 3 days while we still had multiple staff members there, and that we could get that for them. But what we'll encourage them to do is communicate with their teachers and make sure they're provided that access for the 3 days of learning they won't be in person for.
And when we transition to online, will there be any additional cleaning, sanitation happening in our building, knowing that, not only are we dealing with COVID, but we're also going into the flu season? So can you talk about or is that in the presentation later?
No, it's not in the presentation later. I might ask Chase to jump in here a little bit. There are some things where we'll still make buildings accessible for staff during the period of continuous remote learning that happens, but Chase can talk a little bit about what kind of cleaning efforts will be underway during that time.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. It's nice to be with you this evening. And Matt's right about there'll be some access, but one of the benefits will be that access will be limited, and so it'll give our staff more time to implement the cleaning procedures. We felt good about the procedures that we had in place when we were online prior, in terms of the amount of cleaning that was taking place, the time that it was taking place, and that was some of the reports we had from our custodial staff. And so, Ruthina, I think one of the biggest benefits in response to your question is it will have so many fewer people in the buildings that it just allows for the time and that deep cleaning to take place, not knowing that another group's going to be in the next morning or in 10 minutes. We can do some of those processes that we were doing before. And so nothing enhanced per se from last time we were 100% online, but our custodial staff is well aware. They will be in every day, both during the day and in the evenings, to continue that process. We definitely won't step back from that simply because we're moving into that 100% online mode.
Hi, I don't know if we're going to address this later, but I know we're in a really tough position, and I appreciate the work that you're all doing. Unfortunately, the cases have risen, and I think the district did a good job.
It looks like it's off the track. See, that wire, yeah.
Can you hear me?
And there we go. I think we got Jeremy's mic muted there.
The district has done a good job, and I think that there's obviously the website indicates that if the cases go above 10%, then we're going to move to online. And so I know that there's a little notice. I mean, not a little notice has been given. What we've been through the hybrid for a few weeks now, and we know that some of the students are still struggling, but unfortunately we do have to move online because of the situation. What do we have any resources to help students who are still struggling, given that we have to go online 100%? And the second thing I would want to talk about, or I want to ask about, is have we considered how to help the students in terms of their mental health? The season has changed, obviously, and this is the time when like seasonal depression is on the rise. I'm just concerned about what this is doing to the kids, obviously, but I know that health and safety is a priority, but I also want to find out if there are resources in place to help the kids as we transition 100% to online.
Sure. So I think those are good questions, Director Etsy. And so thanks for asking those, Dromi. I do think we'll talk more about some of the academic supports as we get into the presentation. I think your question around the mental health ones, and I'd ask Amy or Laura to jump in here if they would like to. When we think about that, I think all the way back to March and some of those things that we tried to also do to be checking in with students around that, knowing that at that point we were doing required ed opportunities for secondary kids. We had eventually transitioned to, and elementary students were in that voluntary basis. And so there were opportunities where we were intentional about those check-in opportunities, making sure that we were making appropriate referrals to student and family advocates or counselors, that if we were hearing concerns from either parents or students around their mental health, and making sure we were still connecting them to those resources that the district continues to partner with our community partners around. And so Amy or Laura, is there anything additional you'd like to add on that at this point?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Dromi. I would say that social, emotional, behavioral, mental health is top of mind for all of us. And we have a multi-tiered system of supports for that. And so what does that mean? What do all of our students get versus a select few of our students get who we identify versus a very small tippy top of that tier supports that are needed. And so that's the ongoing work that happens in our buildings every week, every day to identify our learners who might be struggling. And we can identify them through various metrics, and that could be attendance, that could be engagement with the Zoom meetings, engagement on the offsite days. It also could be with our kiddos that are on site, you know, what things are we noticing, different behaviors. We currently are not using a screener with our students, but we do have a variety of ways to identify students needing supports. Laura, would you add anything?
I always want to talk about prevention when we talk about this. And so one of the things that we implemented this year that is just now rolling out and being utilized at the junior high level is the second step social emotional learning curriculum. So that's all digital, it's online, it's electronic. All of our junior high teachers and administrators have the access to that. And it's just a wealth of resources and tools, you know, during that homeroom time, if a teacher wants to kind of boost, you know, a certain SEL competency, social emotional learning competency, you know, might be self-awareness, just being aware of your own emotions, feelings, you know, and so there can be these little mini lessons and just resources that the teachers can use. So that's something that is new that, you know, we've rolled out and will continue to help our teachers know how to access and use. And then at the high school level, we're soon going to be implementing a social emotional wellness app that can be utilized kind of in a similar way that students can use, you know, for some universal supports and awareness of their own social emotional health and go deeper, you know, if they choose to. And it can also be used as tiered level of intervention, so you can layer on additional support. We want that support to be provided and connected with the classroom experience. So in addition to our counselors and our SFAs that are always there to provide extra counseling, whether it's individual or small group, as well as connect our students to resources that we have through a variety of partner agencies. We also want our classroom teachers, the ones that are interacting with the students the most, to have some of those SEL resources and tools at their disposal as well. And then of course at the elementary level, we've always, I shouldn't say always, but for a very long time had a social emotional learning curriculum. And so that's been in place for a while. So in addition to everything that has already been said, infusing that within the classroom environment is a really key part. And again, having the educators that are interacting with our students all day, every day, or almost all day, is really key.
I appreciate that. I'll wait to hear the presentation on the learning portion. Thank you.
Are we seeing an uptick in the need for some of those supports?
I would say that need was even here before JP. The uptick was there. And so, I think it's hard to isolate just to COVID. I do think there's probably some increased need around COVID. I don't have data in front of me to give you tonight to show that, but I would say that's something honestly the governor's championed around mental health and saying that there's a need there. And so I think that need was even determined for us and some of that social emotional behavior mental health components were things we were actively working on even pre-COVID. And so then as you hit COVID in a pandemic situation like this, some of the social unrest situations we've had over the summer and those traumatic experiences for some of our students, I definitely think there's an increased need for those components. And so that's where it's incumbent upon us to try to identify who needs that support. And like the team's talked about, trying to connect them to the appropriate resources.
The other thing I would add is that as we're thinking about supporting the students in our system and of course the families, that there's also been an emphasis and a heightened awareness on the need to support our very own staff. They need to be in a good place and space to be able to support each other, as well as support the students that they're serving and the families that they're communicating with. And although we probably have a lot more work that we could do and will continue to do, that's also been an emphasis of a lot of our meetings with administrators. And for example, just yesterday at our elementary principal and IDS meeting, that was a big focus, how you as an educator are going to experience that compassion fatigue. And, you have to make sure that you are also aware of how to take care of yourself and be mindful of that. And so just as I was saying, we're trying to teach the students about their own social emotional learning competencies. Again, I'll just kind of use that self-awareness as one of those 5 competencies. We as adults, need to be aware of that as well so that we can better support each other and our students in doing so. And so that's a real thing. I mean, that's something that we really need to push and emphasize in an explicit instructional way, as well as integrated into everything that we do.
So I have 3 questions. What's going to happen with BASP? What's going to happen? The last time we were all online, we had identified some of our IEP kids that had to be in school. Will we still be able to deliver those services to that group of students in person? And then 3, does this mean that we're going back to the grab and go lunch process that we had when we were all online with the extended hours for pickup? Thanks.
Sure. So actually, I'm going to take your middle one first because that was the one that was on the front of my mind that I didn't want to lose. And so I'm going to ask Lisa to address the special ed component there and what we're doing with some entitled students.
Okay. Good evening. We, to quickly answer your question before I forget to answer it, the short answer is yes, that we will be able to provide services for students whose IEP teams have identified that there is a need for IEP services to be delivered on site during times when the district is implementing the off-site model. Those determinations are made through IEP teams on an individual basis. And those services are written into IEPs, into the remote learning plans. And as I said, they are individual decisions made on the unique circumstances of those individuals. And there are just lots and lots of things that teams consider in order to make those decisions. And what those services, how those services actually look are just, could be a lot of different ways, but could entail some on-site services. So yes, we would be able to deliver those services as long as the board is keeping that option open. And I'm saying it that way because I suppose there could be a point in time at which, the board would possibly come back and say, oh, that, the circumstances in the community, or, the positivity rate or the absenteeism rate or whatever information currently that we have is saying that we are not able to have anyone on site. We are now closing our campuses to everyone. Unless and until that would ever happen, we will plan to deliver those services on site if the IEP says that we will do that. That does not apply to weather-related closure. It applies to delivery of the offsite model. So yes. So I think, did you have additional questions about that, or does that answer your question?
No, thank you, Lisa. That hits what I wanted to know.
Okay.
No, go ahead, Chase, on the
Sure.
food service.
So Lisa, I think your first question was on BASP, if I heard that right. And I should have mentioned this earlier when I was answering Rathina's question, but like we did when we were 100% online at the beginning of the school year, we are going to allow our BASP partners to make the decision about whether or not they want to operate their programs when we're in the 100% online. Obviously, it's a quick turnaround. We provided them a heads up yesterday that we were applying for the waiver to try to provide them as much lead time as possible. Laura and Amy Mintier have been working directly with them. I don't think we have exact numbers back from the different programs, which ones are going to operate. I see Laura shaking her head. So we don't have that information for you, but we are going to make that option available for those programs to continue to operate when we're in this majority off online model. And then your third question about food, which I think is another one of those positive things that Matt talked about at the beginning. Before I let Allison talk about the details, one piece that I don't believe we've actually shared with the board publicly or officially is good news out of the USDA. They've extended the waiver for meals through the end of the school year. Originally it was just through December, but now we know it's going to continue all the way through the end of the school year in the spring, which I think is awesome, especially for our students, right? The question on point right now is about the program here as we move into this majority online period. So Allison, you want to give a quick update?
Absolutely. Thank you. So we will absolutely continue the grab and go meals like we did before. We will have the 7 sites that we've been operating currently. So 6 secondary locations and Hills, and we will expand the time from 11:30 to 1 to give families more time to get there. And we are getting the gear that they need to stand out in December and January and hand out meals so they can kind of stay warm.
Just be sure to send Chase on the first cold, snowy day.
I'll make a note of it.
I think he got the first rainy day in the spring, so that would have.
Well, I think that's another group that really deserves a big kudos. Our food service team has just been tremendous, and it's kind of like the Postal Service, rain, sleet, snow, sun, right? They're out there, and thank you. We've had some feedback about making sure we take care of those folks, and we're going to try to, because we couldn't be doing a lot of this work and taking care of our kids without them. And so we really appreciate their efforts each day and coming in and doing that work.
Yes, thank you.
So Chase, is there any possibility of expanding the number of sites, or do you see, or maybe you or Allison could say what you think in terms of what the demand and interest is?
So, Charlie, we would have to check. The unfortunate part of it is that it's part of an application process. And Allison, please jump in here if I get off track. But when we submitted the applications, originally it was with these sites in mind. And so we would kind of have to go back and potentially do a little bit of modification to get those changes. And so it's not about necessarily a desire or need. It's somewhat compliance driven in some regard, and making sure that we don't lose our standing with the state or the federal government to do this. And so we have to we have to abide by the program guidelines that we set out. And so it's not impossible. We would just have to go back and look at, okay, what do we need to do to make any modifications to that?
And from the beginning, we have always set up our locations to meet the needs of all the students in the district. That's always our guiding principle. And I think what we have found over lots of months of experience is these sites seem to be a good balance geographically, and most families can get to these locations. We also, with our current waivers through the USDA, volunteers can pick up for families, and we have a number of folks that do that as well and work together in different locations to pick up. Families take turns and some of that. So we will always continue to monitor what the needs of the community are and do our best to respond. You know, we have to manage our resources as well with that need. But I feel like our current locations have been working well.
Okay, well, that's very good feedback, Allison. I appreciate it. And Matt, I just had one other question. Can you tell us what the Health and Safety Committee has been talking with you about for this change to all online learning for at least a 2-week period here?
Sure. So, Charlie, with the health and safety team, I can have Kate also talk a little bit about a couple of the recent topics. But in regards to this change, I know they would be supportive or are supportive of our change in transition to online learning, as we've talked to them throughout here. You know, some of the key members on that team or players on that team include, you know, our work with the Johnson County Department of Public Health, and they provided a letter of support for us to make this transition, and we'll make sure that letter is posted on the website so people can see it. And maybe just one overall thing to say kind of as we wrap up some of this conversation, and then if that wasn't sufficient, Charlie, can definitely have Kate address any other conversations health and safety's had. But I know there's going to be people frustrated with this move again, and it's not where people want to be. It's not where we want to be. And that Iowa City has sometimes been seen as an outlier in our approach to this. But what I would encourage people to do is you can go to the Department of Education site. You can see for the multiple districts that have applied for waivers at this point. This is a statewide problem right now. This is a significant problem in the state of Iowa, and it's not just an Iowa City issue. In fact, Iowa City and Johnson County have I think been behind the curve on some of these increased rates because of the health and safety mitigation efforts we've taken, that we have run a hybrid model, that we have asked people to wear masks, that we have been committed to those things throughout. But I do think as people, and certainly and understandably so, are frustrated about another move to online instruction, that we do have to take this one also I'd say, measure to what the rest of the state is doing. And I think you'll see that there's a lot of districts that have submitted applications for a request to transition in the last week, and that we'll see more as the days come. When I talked to the bureau chief of the department today, she said she had 20 requests they're working on from districts. And so the governor's press conference, obviously today, with some additional health and safety mitigation efforts that, you know, they've been delayed in suggesting or implementing across the state for a long period of time, that those have also been increased. And so we know this is a serious situation. We know there's a part we play in that we don't want to be online. We don't want to be online for any longer than we have to. But we feel like it's the appropriate move at this point. And I do feel like the Health and Safety Committee is supportive of that. So if you guys don't have more questions, we do have quite a presentation put together around some of the learning components, and we can transition to that whenever you're ready, Sean. But I don't want to cut off the questions either if there's more that way.
No, I was gonna jump in and have you go ahead and move into the presentation, so we can, accumulate our questions for the end. I want to make sure everybody has a chance to at least hear the presentation as much as they can. So go ahead.
All right, and then I'm going to tell Amy to go ahead and kick it over to her. So go ahead, Amy.
Thanks, Matt. And I'm going to have ask Kristen to share our presentation as we move through this evening. So the first couple of slides really just detail what we've got, the information that we would like to share with you tonight. So Kristen, if you can move to that next slide. It was important to just back up a little bit and spend a little bit of time talking about the work that we did this past summer in preparation for this fall and to set the stage for teaching and learning. We won't go in depth to talk about the models or the schedules, we've been living them, but I think it was important tonight to share with you a little bit of that work that was done around just-in-time learning, and you're going to see some examples of accelerated templates that were developed over the course of the summer. Of course, along with that, I think I was remiss in adding right there that we also had the work of the online course developers happening simultaneous to this just-in-time learning work. And of course, some professional development as we led and opened up the school year. Then we want to spend some time talking about what we've been, the work that we've been doing this fall around multi-tiered systems of supports and what that's looked like. We have some data now to share with you. We have our elementary and junior high FAST data from this fall, as well as some secondary data specific to grades. And then last but not least, we want to share a couple of items with you, an exciting item there at the bottom with the online program, and then just where we now are finding ourselves with enrollment as our open enrollment period for second trimester has now come to a close. So Kristen, if you can move into, so I'm gonna have, I'll take the PD one again. I won't spend too much time on the models or the schedules, but just as a reminder, as we entered into the school year, we had a big focus. So we had 7 days worth of learning to kick off the year, but some of that emphasis, of course, had to be on just return to learn itself. What were our schedules going to look like? And if you can remember, we had a quick change right as the school year was about to begin from thinking that we were going to start in the hybrid model to the online 100% remote for both groups of students. So we had to really try to work through the schedules and make sure the entire staff understood that. Equity has been big and continues to be big, and it was a big part of our kickoff at the beginning of the year. We had Dr. Mohammed here to speak, and also Laura did a nice job talking about racial trauma and culturally responsive instruction as we kicked off the year. Another big emphasis, which we've already touched upon this evening, is that social, emotional, behavioral, mental health component. And we spent a lot of time talking about elements key to our PBIS systems, not only for our students, but like Laura alluded to, for our staff as well. And then last but not least, we can't forget that we are implementing a brand new learning management system at the elementary level. And although we prepped our staff with some professional development in May, it was really the first time that they were learning, utilizing, implementing it just ahead of when they were to see students. And we did not find ourselves in a situation where we could have students on campus with us, walk them through things, teach them how Seesaw worked, as well as how to access all of those other items within Seesaw. So there was a lot of things kind of happening all at one time, but we did our best to continue to prep and prepare our staff. I'm going to turn over to Diane and Scott so they can talk about the accelerated learning templates and just-in-time learning.
Good evening, everyone. As Amy mentioned, a lot of this started in the summer, but much of it has continued and will continue throughout the school year. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about the just-in-time learning work that happened in the summer. So Kristen, if you could maybe move forward to the next slide there. I just gave you 2 examples, both from the math area, one from 3rd grade at the elementary, and then one from Algebra 1, just so you could see the kind of thinking that our teachers have been going through as they've been thinking about what their curriculum typically is. So in this example, what their 3rd grade Unit 2 lesson typically would entail. And then they really wanted to think about what was some lost learning that might apply to this unit that the kids maybe in 2nd grade didn't get because of COVID closure in the spring. So how can we as teachers provide that instruction just in time? So right ahead of this Unit 2, How can we provide that instruction for the kids to make up for any lost learning? And then how can we measure their understanding of those prerequisite skills as well as the learning that's happening throughout the school year? And then what can we do to provide some additional supports for students who are demonstrating that they just aren't getting it, or that they just need some additional support in order to be able to master the content that we're delivering. And then Kristen, on the next slide, if we can just kind of go to the secondary example, same thinking. Again, this is an Algebra 1 example, just looking at one of the standards. So the teachers have realized that they can't teach everything. They can't cover everything that maybe they had in the past. So what are the priority standards? What are those non-negotiables? What are those things that kids must have when they leave Algebra 1? And then what are some prerequisite skills? So in order for kids to be able to access the grade level standard, what is some learning that they have to have in order to be able to access that? What are those prerequisite skills? And what are some of those that maybe, again, weren't taught in the spring due to the closure? And then how can we as teachers create some lessons together, and how can we create some formative assessments so that we can measure students' understanding of that content? Again, this work was started in the summer, but teachers continue to meet as teams, continue to look at this as the units kind of progress, and continue to make revisions in the content that they're teaching and in the supports that they're giving our students.
Thank you, Diane. So the next series of slides are going to address some of the work then after we moved from the summer into the fall that we found ourselves doing and necessary to do. The first run around student engagement, I'm going to have Laura speak to, Laura Daly, and then we'll move into attendance with Kate and go back to Diane and Scott for the elementary and secondary work. If we go to the next slide, I would say with the student engagement process, this is a process that we're pretty proud of. And one of the big reasons for that is typically we find ourselves day to day, you know, working in our silos, working in our on our individual tasks. But this this team that we pulled together around student engagement was really one that had not only several different district admins participating in it, but also as well as our ESE kind of teacher leaders or coordinators on this. So I'll turn it to Laura.
So knowing that the buildings already have systematic structures in place to focus on the needs of students, you know, it may be connecting them to additional resources. It could be providing supports to families as well. That's typically done during what most buildings refer to as their student support team meetings. Well, what we found ourselves doing this fall was then just trying to provide some assistance to the buildings to ensure that as the students were, you know, perhaps logging in and, you know, engaging in that learning environment, making sure that we weren't, you know, missing any students. And so, as Amy mentioned, she, you know, actually led along with a small group of administrators and ESC leaders, some at the coordinator level. We sent out 3 different surveys. You can see the dates that we sequenced them throughout time, really focusing on if buildings were aware of any students that just simply had not logged on, you know, to any of those learning systems, and as well as anecdotal information that they may have about any challenges that the families or students might be experiencing. And so the results from the surveys, which we had some pointed questions to be able to learn more about what might be potential barriers that families and students were experiencing, and, you know, what might be indicative of an individual family or student versus what were some trends or patterns that we were seeing in some of the responses. And so, you know, we really appreciated the building leaders and the teams at the buildings providing that information and analyzing it and sharing it with us so that we could then try to turn around and help provide any problem solving, any supports and any solutions. And so as we implemented those surveys, you know, we were, Adam's tech department, you know, was really great about just making sure that request for tech services and any troubleshooting support was clearly outlined, and that building staff knew who to contact and what to fill out. And the process for that, which, you know, was monumental for the tech department to be able to do. And so we really partnered, you know, with the building staff to know who to contact and how to troubleshoot any issues related to that. And then just refining our communication strategies and developing a continuum, kind of a menu of actions for buildings to take. Some, of course, a little bit edited so that from some of the supports and services we typically provide, just to maintain and prioritize staff health and safety. So buildings, you know, were given some support and direction on just how to go about doing that outreach in this environment that we, you know, have found ourselves in. And then as a result of a lot of this information, we then deployed a contact person within our learning supports department to be kind of a liaison between the ESC and the buildings, just to see if there were some particular supports that could be provided. And as you can see from, you know, within a little less than a month's time, we kind of whittled away at the number of students as we were gathering that information about students who were, you know, without a single sign-on experience, from 265 to 60 students. And, you know, some of our takeaways that we learned were just really increasing that partnership, you know, between the building staff and the ESC that to problem solve with us. We also learned that, you know, if there were families that were initially experiencing some technology barriers, as we problem solved and troubleshooted through that, we were able then to identify some other types of challenges or barriers the family might be experiencing, and trying to connect them with some wraparound supports that might be, you know, some of the questions that were asked earlier tonight, maybe some social emotional behavioral supports through our partner agencies, or making sure that there are, they have a building contact person, one contact person, to be able to bring their issues or questions to, or to problem solve. We also were able to identify some families that, you know, really the barrier had more to do with their limited English speaking proficiency, and increase the use of our language line as an interpreter service that, you know, we can and should be utilizing if a interpreter wasn't available. And so we also were able to work with some of our community partners to help them know a few tips and strategies about Seesaw or Canvas, as they were helping students and families, whether it was through a NEST program or Open Heartland, for example. And so we really were able to just drill down further to what, you know, were the student engagement issues that, again, often started with technology, but then as, you know, you provided those more individualized supports and have those supportive conversations, you're able to identify deeper beyond that, you know, what might be the connection or the relationship that needed to be built to be able to, for those families to be able to be connected. As I understand it, Amy is thinking that we will again send out that similar survey at the beginning of Try2. Well, we'll see what happens now, because, you know, so much is changing, but we want to continue that process so that we continue to make sure that students are engaged in that learning environment. Amy, anything I missed or anything you would add to that? Or anyone else that served on that team?
Did a really nice comprehensive job on what that committee and the work that was done, and really proud that that data dropped over time. But you can see the question was pretty pointed at a single sign-on. I mean, they had to be thinking about the number of students as a single sign-on, and that threshold's not very high, right? And so with that last survey, although the questions each time remained the same, we did add a few towards the end So we knew that we might have students struggling, and we were trying to identify then by that point down to the student name. And ultimately, even though we've been really strict with trying to keep our students enrolled in the learning model that they selected at the beginning of the year, we did find ourselves going back and offering to some of our families, if they wanted to come back on site, we could accommodate that need. And about 75% of the families that we offered it back to after having gone through this process did determine to send their kids to the hybrid environment then. Thanks, Laura. We'll move to attendance with Kate.
All right. So as Laura mentioned, and Amy, that due to the nature of the school year and the difficulties many students and families are facing, we knew that staff members really need to make an exceptional effort to ensure that students can access school. So with that, we've been also partnering with the County Attorney's Office to redefine attendance. And so how we're defining attendance is looking at a compilation of data. So looking at unexcused absences along with student progress, and then response to interventions to support families and students in attending school. So if there are concerns with student attendance, we're really working hard to provide accommodations and offer flexibility. So we want to be real understanding of unique family situations. So for example, you may have a parent that works third shift and it may be hard for a student to get online right away until they get home. And so we don't want to be overly punitive. We also know people may fall ill or be unable to support their students. So we need to be caring, supportive, and innovative in our approaches to educating students, and we're working hard to do that. So as Laura mentioned, we're increasing outreach efforts to families through our SFAs, counselors, teachers, and administrators. In addition, we have a real exciting new partnership with UAY, and they're going out to homes of families who are struggling with attendance, and they have helped us to bridge that relationship between school and family and help troubleshoot situations. We're also offering additional district mediation to resolve any attendance concerns before there's a referral to the county attorney's office. And even with that, the county attorney's office has offered additional mitigation efforts before there's truancy court proceedings of any type. So as you can see, we've developed many layers of supports for attendance, and which we really need to do given this unique situation we find ourselves in.
Thank you, Kate.
All right, I'll take over then when we talk about what are some of the academic interventions that we're doing with our students. At the elementary, we are just going right back to our tried and true intervention model that we've done for the last several years, and we are implementing it whether we're in a hybrid setting or whether we're in an online setting. So two of those interventions that we provide for our students, one would be a class-wide intervention. So if we have a class who has less than 60% of their students who are proficient, we know that that class has a lot of needs. So we need to change up our core instruction, and we need to really be thinking about what are the gaps in the learning that these students have that we need to provide for them. So we provide that for our students during the online learning program. That's done during the morning meeting. And with our on-site students, that's done during core instruction. And those class-wide interventions are provided by our classroom teachers. Janet had asked about, maybe some changes that we are considering, and that is one consideration that we're looking at for the time that our classroom teachers have with their whole class. Currently, the only time our classroom teachers have in an online setting with their whole class is during the morning meetings. And we really tried to prioritize social emotional learning during that time because we know that that's critical for our students. But we're also finding that there's times when the teachers just need more time with the whole group to provide either a class-wide intervention or to provide some core instruction in reading and math. So we are looking at maybe adding a little bit of synchronous learning time for that to be able to happen as we move to an online program for our kids. Then we are also offering individual interventions for those students who are below proficient. Those are offered again in English language arts and in math. those can be offered throughout the day. So the classroom teacher may only have a small chunk of time, maybe an hour or so during the day, to provide interventions for students. But we also have support teachers such as Title I teachers, academic support teachers, special education teachers, who can provide those interventions in small groups throughout the day. So you'll see that some of our students, even in an online setting, might have additional time, synchronous learning opportunities for them to Zoom in with a teacher or a support teacher in order to get an intervention in reading and or math, depending on what their screening results showed us. Then I'll turn it over to Scott for some information about the secondary.
Yeah, and I'll partner with Greg during this first part. Greg came up with a notion of what we call super PLCs. PLCs are professional learning communities. And I'd just like him to share a moment about some of that work, and then I'll piggyback off of that.
Sure. Thanks, Scott, and thanks for having me here tonight. It's nice to join the board meeting. We did recognize the need to get teachers together who are teaching the same courses. We knew that a couple things were happening. One is that online teaching is new and online learning is new. We noticed from the results from what our students were doing in the classroom that we had some significant work to do to align our students learning online with what our teaching was doing, because we recognized that we had some students who started out poorly, and we were really concerned they were going to check out and lose access to not only their first trimester class, but also second and third trimester classes. The idea was to get our teachers, say in a common course, say English 9 or Algebra 1 or pre-algebra, Earth and Space, those kind of classes together, so that they would be able to identify our priority standards and that we would be able to come up with a pathway to passing that would preserve the dignity for the student. In other words, it wasn't going to be, here's your pathway and it's super hard to get to it. We were going to be able to focus exactly on our priority standards and leave out some of the other work. So what they've been doing with the guidance of our great curriculum coordinators are working together to, again, identify these priority standards and come up with assessments and work that will allow students to demonstrate that they are proficient without loads of extra homework. So the other task that they have to do right now is to make sure that common courses end up at approximately the same spot at the end of the trimester. And so that's part of their work of the super PLCs that are taking place now. We are going to look to the future to do some ongoing work on focusing on proficiency and really examining grade books so that we can ensure that what's going in the grade book represents what students can know and do and not how well they behave in class. Sometimes those things are confounded, and there is a tendency to grade good behavior and it masks what students actually know and what they can do.
I'll just add a couple things. It may not be obvious, but it was pretty obvious to us early on that with online teachers and on-site teachers, especially with the online teachers, that they're teaching kids from all three buildings, right? So a West High teacher might have kids from Liberty City and West, and that those kids may choose a different environment when they go to the second trimester. So it was really critical, this work that Greg was talking about getting the same content covered in the first trimester across all those. And so it caused us to be more interreliant, which I think is a really good thing. I want to remind you of kind of the first three questions of the PLCs, and that is, what should students know? That's what teachers are really working hard on. What are those high priority standards that Greg's talking about? How we know it? That's aligning those assessments to those high priority standards. And then what are we going to do when kids don't know? And so there's a fourth question, but we've really been focusing on those three. The teachers have been doing that every week in the morning in those large classes like American Studies and Algebra 1. And we've also devoted Wednesday afternoon PD time to that work as well, and taken some time away from building meetings and things like that. So I think that's a fairly comprehensive look on that piece. Amy?
Thank you, Scott. All right, we're going to segue into the next area then and start sharing some of our data. So a little bit later on in our annual progress report, we're going to share our FAST data from last year, and we would have data to share through the winter universal screening period. So you're actually going to see some back-to-back screening periods worth of data later the winter of 2020 and now the fall of 2020. So Diane, do you want to talk a little bit about what we're seeing in our results?
I will. So this is, again, the screening data from FAST. FAST is Formative Assessment System for Teachers. We screen, and screening means just kind of a quick, short assessment. We screen all of our students, K through 8, in reading and in math. And that's really to help us try to identify the students who might be needing some additional supports. So you'll see on this slide that Kristen has up now, some of our fall FAST data from the past 4 years, and also we were able to add some state data from this fall as well for reading. So this is reading and this is elementary K6. If you look at the bottom line on the far right chart, you'll see all of our K6 students. In the fall of 17, they were 75% of them were proficient. Then it dropped to 70, rebounded to 72. And you look at this fall, we're at 64% of our students entered school showing proficiency at that grade level. So that is certainly a drop in what we've been used to seeing for our kids. Not surprising due to the fact that we had school closure in the spring. I also gave the state number right next to it, 61% across the state. So even the state certainly has seen some drops. And again, that was because school was closed throughout the state in the spring. The other interesting little piece, I think, on this chart is looking at the kindergarten through 6th grade data. And I'll just kind of walk you through the state numbers because they're very similar to our numbers as well. But kindergartners walked in about 67% proficient, pretty similar to where they might have been in the past, maybe a little bit lower. But look at the 1st grade. Look at the drop in learning that those 1st grade numbers are showing us. And why might that be? Well, you consider that 1st grade kids lost 1/3 of their entire K-12 learning experience. They lost a full trimester. They'd only been there 2 trimesters. So the impact on our 1st grade kids was huge. You'll see the impact in 2nd grade, but maybe not as big. And then as it kind of goes through 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, there certainly is an impact, but not as large as it was in 1st grade for our reading. Now, if we go to the next slide, that is our math data. Again, K6 data, again, the bottom line on the far right chart, you can see in fall of 17 and 18, those are pretty low numbers, 66%. We've figured out after 2 years of giving the math assessment in kindergarten and first, we were giving a computer adapted assessment. Kids just were really struggling with demonstrating their knowledge on a computer assessment in kindergarten and 1st grade. So we switched in the fall of 19 to give a one-on-one. It's called an early math assessment for kindergarten and 1st grade. So we certainly saw our numbers increase in the fall of 19. To 72% of our students were proficient. And this fall they came in at 70%. So a little bit of a drop, not as huge as reading by any means, but still an area that we want to always continue to improve. And for those numbers, I just don't have state comparison data. Then on the next chart, we started last year assessing our 7th and 8th grade with the adaptive reading and the adaptive math test. Looking at those numbers, they don't look like there's a drop at all. We had 72% proficient in the fall of 19 and 75% proficient this fall. So one might say that we actually increased, but I'd have to give a little caveat to that. And I kind of put a little note there. We were not able to assess all of our students this fall. The adaptive reading, adaptive math test is a test that the kids take on the computers. We assigned it. We asked all the kids to take it. They were supposed to be doing that when they were at home. We just found that we really struggled getting all of our kids to take that test. So we only were able in reading to test and in math to test about 87% of our kids. So we could maybe assume that the 13% of the kids that we didn't test might have been those who were reluctant to take the assessment. And that could have been because maybe they in the past hadn't performed so well on the assessment. So those results, while are encouraging, I think we have to take kind of with a grain of salt. Same is true with the math assessment as well. Looked like 78%, or 72%, I'm sorry, in the fall of 19, up to 74% now.
Thanks, Diane. Before we hear from Scott, I would just add, I think it was maybe Ruthina that asked last time if we could see the data delineated out by the hybrid students versus the online students. And at the time this test was given, we were just coming out of everybody being 100% remote. And so there wouldn't be stark differences that you could draw because of that. The other thing, when I think about our testing environment this fall, we would have had our kids on site and our hybrid kiddos that just came on site. We did the testing with them in person. We did refer back to our online program, parents and students, the ability to have their students tested on site if they felt comfortable enough. And so we did have some of our families take us up on that. But for the time, some of our teachers were delivering or assessing students virtually. So that's a different component that we hadn't ever found, a circumstance we hadn't found ourselves in before.
I'll continue on a little bit with that thought, the question from Ruthina. We have gone back though, and we've looked at our online students versus our hybrid students and their past data, as well as their fall data. And just even looking at their past data and their fall data, we have seen a discrepancy. So our online students perform better than our on-site students. And that, you know, those kids were not randomly assigned. Those kids were elected into that program by their parents. So it might show us that maybe the parents of students who were performing pretty well academically felt more comfortable having their kids elect to a 100% online environment. And the parents of students who maybe were struggling a little bit more wanted that security of sending their kids to school. So we'll make sure when we look at that data in the winter, we'll want to take account that difference that the kids kind of started with.
All right, good evening. I first wanted to start by saying thanks to the directors at our last board meeting. I think you were asking the right questions. You knew that school was hard and you wanted that quantified and by demographics. So I'm going to share that information tonight. It's clearly hard for our kids. It's hard for our staff. Our staff are working extremely hard, but it is difficult teaching in an online environment and difficult teaching in a hybrid environment. It's hard for our administrators, and you're going to see some numbers that show how hard it is. So in a typical year at midterm, and that's just a snapshot, students with a grade of F, 1 or more Fs, range about 20 to 22% in our secondary schools. That's grades 7 through 12, and that's in a normal non-pandemic year. Not an awesome number, but that is our number. By the end of the trimester, this typically falls to the low teens. And the good news, I think, in this data is we've been tracking this for a while. So you ask these questions, administrators have been following this for a while. So I think our alignment mentally is the same as yours. At the midterm, middle of October, that was 3 weeks of online teaching and 3 weeks of hybrid for our hybrid kids. And it was 6 weeks of online teaching for our online kids. We had 37% of our kids with at least 1 F in grades 7 through 12. Not quite double, but significantly higher. It's hard. Next slide, please. I've got some demographics for you. And this is our junior high data. I'm going to start at the bottom. The district average for junior high for online was 39% and for hybrid was 35%. So our online junior high kids did a little bit poorer than our on-site kiddos. And then you can see the demographic breakdown. And so when we talk about the achievement gap, we have the achievement gap, right? When our Black or our African-American students are failing at a 60% clip and our district average is 39%, that's an achievement gap. And you can see the same for our Latino and Latina students as well. And then I heard you last week ask about ELL students and IEP students and how do our free and reduced lunch kiddos do. And so you have that data there on the right as well. So our ELL subgroup is the group that is struggling the most. So 73% of our kids at midterm, middle of October, had at least one F. Again, nearly double what's happening in the general population. Next slide, I've got the same data for high school. And so like I said, where the on-site or the hybrid kiddos did a little bit better for the junior high, the reverse is true at the high school. Actually, our online kiddos did a little bit better than our on-site and our hybrid kiddos, but we still have that same disproportionality in our grades that you saw in the junior high slide. Next slide for me, please. I could pull a lot of data, but I happened to pull the ELL data with the help of Kim and Sheila in the ELL department. And so I wanted to find out, are we making any progress since the middle of October? And so she pulled data for me on Monday of this week, yesterday. And so our standard enrollment kids, our hybrid kids, dropped from 77% to 42% kids with Fs. 42% still a lot. But that's almost a 50% cut. If it was 80% to 40, that'd be a 50% cut, right? So we're 77 to 42. So that's for our standard enrollment kids, and our online kiddos were almost identical in terms of the same number of kids in online with Fs that there were at midterm. One caveat there, Amy talked about it earlier, we recruited a lot of our ELL kiddos from the online version of school to the on-site version of school. And so by getting them on school, you can see we're at school, you can see we're having more success with them. So even though that isn't quite a 50% cut, we're serving more kids on site that are ELLs, and it's actually a bigger improvement than that might show. But on a percentage basis, not quite 50%. That might be my last slide on data. I don't know for sure. Yes.
Thanks, Greg. Do you want to talk about our recent news with our online program?
Sure. I'm very happy to report that the work of so many different people over the summer and really going back a year before that, headed up by Adam Kurth and some other folks, the groundwork was laid for the online program to get started here. Of course, COVID put it into an accelerated move, and we had to move very quickly in order to get curriculum online and ready for students to be 100% online. That was temporarily approved by the state for this 1 year by governor's order. We did then send an application about 4 weeks ago, and about a week and a half ago, the state returned an approval for our online program for it to be available to anyone in an ongoing basis. So the online program will be able to be up and running on its own as its own entity going past the 2021 school year. And that means that in the fall of 21, we can accept open enrollment into our online program. That we hope will give us a way to significantly make inroads into the number of students who are coming into our building or into our district versus those who use the open enrollment to leave. By doing so, we hope to recoup significant costs savings with keeping the dollars here in our district, and also providing students from outside the district to join one of the strongest curriculums that you will be able to find in the state of Iowa. So we do think that we are hoping that some students around the district, around the state, who are looking for an alternative way to learn will understand that the Iowa City online program will provide them with a real curriculum, not a canned curriculum. This was done, we got this curriculum approved with 99% with our own curriculum, only one class. Part of the approval process came from Edgenuity, just one out of the hundreds. So I'm very proud of the work that the the teachers and our coordinators and administrators did over the summer to get this into such great shape that it was able to be approved in so short a time. So with that, our future plans are to look at the program post-COVID. We don't know when that's going to be. We certainly hope it'll be sooner rather than later. We set up a couple committees to really look at what's working really well and what we would like to improve about the program, and put together some public-facing document so that parents and students around the state, if they're interested in an online program for high school graduation, that they would be able to assess our program and hopefully see if it fits them and join the Iowa City School District, because we would love to have them. And that's the news for tonight from the online program.
Can I ask a question here real quick on this?
Sure.
Just for perspective, how many other districts in the state have this available?
7 when I put in the application. So I think we're the 8th, but I didn't go back and see if anybody else has been approved during that time.
Thanks. That's exciting.
Thank you, Greg. Adam, do you want to talk about our second trimester enrollment statistics?
Yeah, and Kristen, can you jump to the next slide? So one of the things that we looked at between Tri 1 and Tri 2, clearly is providing that option to families to make the choice about where they want to continue their enrollment mode placement, whether they want to continue in the mode that they're already in, or whether they wanted to change that at trimester. And that process closed at the end of last week. And you can see here the changes, and these are mostly framed in terms of the online program. The really opposite movement would be true into the traditional enrollment. But if you look at this, you can see that we do have a decline from Tri 1 to Tri 2 in terms of total enrollment, and that's pretty consistent. We actually see that decline across all of those groups. We broke it out by grade band, also some demographic areas, some other subgroups. And we see a pretty consistent, district-wide, we have the 4%, and that's 4% of the entire student enrollment, I should point out. But the 4% change from 44 to 40 in the online program. And we see, some fluctuation within certain groups, and some of them are not surprising. For instance, it was mentioned earlier that there was a focus on reaching out to students in the ELL program who may benefit from an on-site placement. So you see those declines are a little bit steeper than the others, but they're all within, a fairly tight range. And one of the things that we're looking at here is that we really, didn't see an exodus. We knew going into this year that the primary driver behind families choosing our online program is health and safety. As Greg just talked about, we do anticipate that, we'll continue an online program and develop what that looks like. And that'll probably look pretty substantially different. But it'll also be serving individuals who are opting into that for, potentially other reasons beyond health and safety. So here we know that most of the kids in this program would prefer to be in school, and we'd prefer to have them in school. At the same time, though, with the health and safety concerns that are out there, we still do see a substantial majority of families who were in the online program for Tri 1 have opted to continue in that program. If you take a look at the table on the right, we basically broke out the movement. So that's for trimester 2, the first column, OLP to traditional, are the number of students moving from the online program who are in online Tri 1 to a traditional enrollment by grade band. And then the second column is the opposite. So moving from traditional to online. This is actually pretty interesting. So when we looked at our Tri 1 online enrollment, we saw much higher levels at the elementary and junior high levels than we did at the high school level. And as we move here into Tri 2, we're seeing, and there are a number of reasons that really drive this, and that's something we'll be looking into further. But we see, much more substantial movement, both numerically and percentage-wise, from online to traditional in terms of that net change at the elementary and junior high levels. At the high school level, it's not a wash, but it's not far from one. So that's kind of interesting to look at. And again, that's one of those things that we want to learn more about, especially as we get to Tri3 and the potential that, once again, we're going to be in a position where we're providing this choice and we're looking at the staffing implications and programming implications of that. So that'll be an area that we need to look into in terms of getting more information about, families who stayed and families who moved, why they made that choice. But these numbers are, not unexpected on our part. If anything, we're pretty happy that we haven't, unlike some other districts that I'm aware of, we haven't seen, an exodus from our online program at all. So there's clearly, a level of satisfaction with what's being provided there. And at this point, I'll turn it back over to Amy.
Thank you, Adam. So before we move to questions, just a few comments. I just want to extend a huge thank you to all of our staff, and in particular our teachers. We think back to March, to the school closure that we experienced between our admin team, our teaching team, and all the staff members that really had to re-envision what school could look like and has looked like. I mean, it's just phenomenal about the heavy lift that we've had to encounter. And you think back to the continuous learning model that we were in the springtime, and how our teachers were reaching out to our families at the elementary level because we weren't in required continuous. The things we were asking our families to do for the first time, whether it was Lexi and Dreambox, the work over the summer with those 7 huge teams, starting with our leadership group and working our way down and out through health and safety, academics, the equity portion, the data portion, and so on and so forth. There's just been a tremendous amount of work to get us to this point. And that's heavy on the backs of our teachers. And I just want to make sure that we're sharing our sincere gratitude to that group today. And also then to our families and to our students. Everybody's experiencing learning in a different way that none of us have ever experienced, went to school for, to learn about, and we're doing it in the best way that we know how. It's not without its issues or its problems. We've talked tonight about student engagement. You've seen some of our data with our DNF data. You've seen our reading data drop at the elementary level. But it's certainly what we come here to work for every day, to ensure that we're offering the best kind of product that we can in front of our students in a really unprecedented time. And I also want to share that as we take questions tonight, we've got Eliza Proctor here, one of our elementary principals, and Elizabeth Bruning, our junior high principal. They were integral to a lot of the work that happened this summer. And then of course, right now they are boots on the ground admins. And so as we entertain questions, I'm hopeful that they're able to provide sort of a building level look to as we try to answer our questions to the best of our ability. So with that, I turn it over to anyone that has questions.
I really appreciate that presentation. This is exactly what I was hoping for, after our last meeting, when I really wanted to kind of dig into where we're at with the learning. I do have a couple questions. One of them was kind of the impetus behind me asking the question. I've heard anecdotally now from a couple different elementary teachers and a couple different secondary teachers that what they're seeing is that we still have a real high end of achievement and a real low end like we always have, and maybe that gap's gotten a little wider, but the middle has kind of disappeared. And so I'm just kind of curious, is that a global thing that you're seeing as you now have some numbers from across the district? So that's one question. And the other one is, I guess it's more specifically for the secondary, on the number of Fs that are out there. Is it there's Fs because people just aren't doing any work? They're not turning anything in, not engaged at all, or they're just really struggling with the material and not able to get the work product that we're looking for? So those are kind of two big questions I have.
I can take a couple of them and then other people can chime in. The phrase that I've heard a lot from staff is feast or famine, Sean. So that gap in the middle is exactly what I am hearing as well, that the kids that are engaged are really engaged and we don't have all of them there. The reason for a D or an F just varies by kiddos. You know, I wouldn't paint a brush across all of that. Yes, we have some kids that are really struggling to be engaged. And at the same time, we have some kiddos that are engaged and still struggling with the content. So it's some of everything, I would say, but I'm happy to let others chime in.
Just looking at some of our FAST data, we can also, there's a band that we look at what they called college pathway. So students who are doing very well on the assessment, that has remained pretty consistent. So in that respect, the haves, you know, the kids that are doing well has remained consistent. The kids who are struggling has increased. So then that would mean that the middle is probably getting squished, as you would say.
Yeah, I would also say we saw a tendency for some students who just didn't connect with their classes because of the online mode, whether they came a little late and the distance through distance learning was just a little too great. And so we lost them at the beginning. And that's where we really were trying to reclaim those students to get them to come back, because let them know that they didn't dig too big of a hole, that we are still going to give them a pathway where they can get their proficiency, or they can demonstrate some proficiency, and we can pass them for this class and get them in a good standing for the next 2 tries. And we just saw more of that this year because the nature of online learning, and it's harder to be attentive when you're just kind of lying down at home. Just students were not really mentally ready, some of them, to take on that challenge right away, and we weren't ready to connect with them. I mean, I'll be frank with you, that's hard. It's hard to do, and teachers learned after a while how to do it, but we didn't have it, we all didn't know how to do it right away. So yeah, we had more kids just not engaged than we wanted.
So I get maybe a little follow-up or expand on that a little bit. As we, started out struggling and kind of relearn and reaching out and whatnot, are we maintaining the rigor and the expectations that we have, or are we're not just lowering the bar, I guess is the question. Like, be for anybody, really.
I think one thing, and the team can sure jump in here, Sean, but I think one good example in that presentation was that just-in-time piece that Diane talked about around the standards and the high academic standards that are still there, along with the pre-teaching possibilities that would need to be there for them to be able to access those standards. And so I don't think expectations were lowered in that sense. We knew there was going to be some gaps from the spring where we had to teach that so they could access and so we could maintain those high standards as we go throughout. I do think it's a careful balance when we talk about social, emotional, behavior, mental health. We want to maintain rigor. We want to maintain high expectations, make sure that they're getting the standards they need to be successful, while also trying to have that lens in our thinking every time we approach that teaching and learning aspect too. And so, there's no magic solution for that. I think that's what the teachers are trying to do on a consistent basis and work through. And so, I don't know, Eliza and Liz have sat here with us. If there's any kind of thoughts they'd want to add into that one, or any particular thoughts that they had as they went through that presentation, I'd sure like them to have a chance to talk about some of the work their teachers have done or things that they've seen too, and the hard work that their groups have been committed to.
Well, I can speak from a secondary perspective, and specifically here at Northwest Junior High. Sean, you asked the question about, is it that kids are not understanding the material, or are they just not doing the work? And sometimes it's kind of hard to tell, because if they're not doing the work, it's hard to tell if it's because they didn't understand it, or if there was some other block that was happening there. And as we've gotten more students to come back in the hybrid model, we've been able to make some adjustments, and teachers have worked really hard to make adjustments themselves too, not necessarily lowering the rigor, but making adjustments to their expectations of how much work they should be assigning and what types of assignments they should be assigning. So they're looking at their essential standards in a different way and determining how can they best measure student understanding of those standards now in this new model. it's really helped to get a lot of those ELL students and IEP students back in the building, and we've really spent a lot of time. So thinking back to some of the conversation earlier tonight about how are things going to look different as we go into another online model, I think that we've made those connections with students that we didn't have before, and so that's going to help as we transition to online. We've helped students understand how to use Canvas and PowerSchool and Zoom, and been able to do that in person. So I think we'll see some more success as we transition back online than we did at the beginning of the school year. But our team of administrators, guidance counselors, and student family advocates will be reaching out daily to make sure that those students are connecting. But I think we've made a lot of progress already this fall of deciding and determining what is essential in our classes and how to support our students both in person and online to make sure that we're getting them caught up and make sure that they're understanding what they need to understand at this point in the year.
Yeah, Liz, and from the elementary lens, I would share your same sentiment. The data that Diane did share is from the very beginning, of the school year. And so those students that are identified as some risk or high risk, those are the ones that we're jumping in and doing some diagnostic screening to figure out where some of those gaps are, going back and we call it kind of surveying back and try to figure out where their highest level of need is. And then that's where we're jumping in with our interventions. We are tracking our students weekly with the progress monitoring to see if our instruction is matching their need and that we are closing that gap. So that is absolutely at the forefront, of our mind and making sure that we're doing that, which is our traditional practice. But now we are, really hitting it hard because we know that for some students, we don't have them 5 days a week in the hybrid, and really wanting to make sure that we're capitalizing on the time that they're there and giving them exactly what they need to be able to close that gap. Again, with the class-wide interventions, we've seen those in a few more places. We also did start new curriculum for language arts in a lot of our buildings this year. And so that's been something new to get used to, but it's really explicit. And so being able to get in and work with the kids and provide that direct instruction has shown some growth just in the short period of time that we have been at school. And we anticipate to still see that. So thanks for asking.
I'll just add one more thing from Scott's data about the drop in the ELLFs. And I would say that's been pretty much across the board when we saw those numbers come in at midterm, it was kind of like flashing lights that we knew something had to change. And so we really needed to take a hard look at what we were doing as teachers and administrators in the building and make some changes. And so we spent a lot of time looking at that. And some of it went back to some conversations that we'd started last year and the year before about grading policies and what is best practice for our students and what do those grading policies look like. And so it just kind of amped up those conversations and put them into high gear because it's really important work that we had started, but really needed to aggressively pursue at this time.
I'll add another piece that Liz hit on. And so the summer was coming and I was worried about engagement. And so Diane connected me with a research company that the district contracts with, Hanover. And I said, how do we help our kids be more engaged? Can you find me some research? Can you send me some articles? And every last one of those articles had nothing to do with tools and apps and all that. It was all about the relationships that we build. And that's what scared me about the beginning of this year. In the spring, we knew our kids and teachers had them for 2/3 of a year, and we had connected with those kids. And especially at the secondary level, we start with a brand new set of kids, and our teachers are masters at building relationships. But the truth is we didn't know our kids at the beginning of the year. And so I'm optimistic at this point that, we've been with our kids for 9 weeks, we know them. And even though we're going to move to online next week, I just think that that's really important. The best tool we have for engagement is our relationships with kids. And I have confidence that our teachers are building those relationships with them.
I just have one last thing to add exactly to that. I think the question of what have we learned and what are we going to do different? Oh my goodness, what have we learned? Just, in the hybrid in those first 3 weeks, everybody in the continuous online, and then what we've learned in the online program, our teachers are doing just absolute phenomenal things. And so are our families and our students. And so we're really having those conversations with our online program teachers right now this week, like, give me your tips and tricks, like for the next couple of days, those that are going to be in hybrid, moving into online, tell me what you've figured out already. And so those are things that our teachers are starting to have those conversations and put those things together to support our students. And so, if Monday is the day that we're starting back online, that we're ready to go. The other thing is that relationship piece is huge. And so we've been able to put together a better schedule, knowing our kids now of who needs an extra support and when that's going to be better, knowing if a student does better with a back-to-back Zoom, maybe their morning meeting and then ELL instead of waiting an hour and coming back on. Those are things that we're working on right now to try to make this transition as smooth as possible and best meet the needs of our kids.
I'll just chime in as a parent of an elementary school student. I'm amazed at the job her teacher has done with that very thing, connecting, building relationships. My daughter, we'd had this discussion and that was the big reason for her really to stay online, was hoping, right, that she'd get the same teacher. And that really tells me that that's where it's at, that they're reaching them and able to connect. And so I've been, just really impressed.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off of what JP said and echo it. I've been really impressed. And I know that tonight we talked about a lot of the kids that we're not reaching. But I just wanted to take a moment and pause and say that this district is doing some really great things. And thank everyone for their hard work, for the teachers' work, the admin work. We on the board have gotten some emails from parents who are so grateful for online. I remember one who said that her child struggled with massive anxiety going to school last year, and the ability to stay at home and was failing and was doing really bad. And the ability to learn at home has done a 360. And her child is participating and being a part of class and getting great grades. And we've gotten other emails from parents who are so grateful that they feel like they're sending their child to a school that's safe or getting to keep their child at home. So thank you all for this work. There's certainly work that we need to do with some of our students and getting them where they need to be. But these numbers aren't all terrible. There's some really good indicators here, good signs. And I think everyone should be so proud of what we've done since March.
I just want to chime in. Sorry, Charlie,
No, go ahead, Ruthie. No, Ruthie, go ahead.
I agree. We are doing some really great things. And, I want to thank the administrative team, but as well as our staff and teachers. We're operating, or at least trying to operate and educate our students like it's a normal situation, that they are able to learn on, the ever-changing atmosphere that they're presented in. And a lot of our kids and teachers are undergoing personal traumas or personal stress. And so it's remarkable to see that a lot of our kids are able to continue to thrive in these environments. But I am a little bit concerned regarding the reading proficiencies, to see that dip in our students that's already behind. And they're already struggling. And I know last time when we talked about this, seems like forever because we were at the board table, and I started off saying that I know that the folks in our district and in our building, they work their butts off to get every single one of those gains we saw in fall 2019. And I'm just fearful that as we continue on, we'll see more of those slides. And I'm willing to hear anything outside the box to get these kids that we're seeing these larger drops for. They're not proficient. I mean, they're just not. And I'm concerned that if we're not laying the foundation for them in K through 6, they're going to continue to struggle in high school. So I just commend you all for the work that you're doing, but also I'm a cheerleader for thinking outside the box to whatever you can think of to pull our kids up as quickly as possible, so that when they go to high school, they continue to be engaged and able to compete with their peers. So I didn't want to sound like a Debbie Downer, so I hope I didn't. But I just wanted to be realistic, because we do have people listening, and we do have some of these kids and parents listening that want to make sure that we're going to continue to fight to get them to where we know they can be.
Well, I think that's an excellent point, Ruthina. And I think the challenge for us has to be not just seeing this in the short term. We have to see this as a long-term question for us to answer as well. And so there's things we're doing right now. There's things that we know we need to continue to get better at, and that we have. And, you know, all your guys' thanks are much appreciated, you know, on behalf of all the people working on it in the district. But we know this isn't just a 2020 problem or a 2021 problem. This is going to be an issue that, you know, confronts us for a period of time, and something that's going to impact teach and learning, not just this academic year or last academic year, but academic years moving forward. And I've addressed that to, you know, different community commenters or people that you've seen email us in that question. And I think that's the challenge for the system long term, is after we're around this experience in some fashion, how does that change teach and learning? And those are the questions that we have to be able to get to and answer. And so when you're talking about those think outside the box or those different approaches, I don't think it's just in this situation. That's going to be upon us in years to come, that we have to continue to answer that question too. And like you guys had said, this was already something upon us before that we needed to try to address. And now it's going to become even more urgent. So I loved how Principal Bruning talked about, it's made us accelerate those conversations where we knew there was best practice conversations we need to have. There was teach and learning practices that we wanted to try to improve upon, and we knew we needed to. And this has maybe forced the issue on some of those things. And so if there's a silver lining we can find in any of that, that may be it right there.
On that, I did have a question, and I assume that we're going to continue to reach out and invite those families who are maybe struggling the most into our buildings. And maybe the other way around, if we can identify if there are kids who would benefit, you know, from an online experience, bullying, anxiety, you know, some of that, just having the flexibility to kind of get what our families need, you know, kind of when they need it. And so hopefully that continues.
Yeah, I think we'll continue to look for those opportunities when we identify students that are struggling, JP, and trying to figure out how we best serve them and answer that question. And I think I missed another part of what you'd asked there about if that would continue, but I know I hit that part. Was there a second piece you had to your question?
You know, just, you know, if some, you know, maybe we identify some students, you know, or families who are benefiting or might benefit from the online, you know, it could go both ways. I think for most folks, in-person learning is probably going to be strongest, but, you know, I don't want to discount the fact that there could be some students that it would work the other way.
Yep, definitely. And we still have some exceptions for where that applies to if that need presents. And so, yep.
I've been trying to look as we talk here at the data that was presented, and looking on page 13 of the slides. For elementary students, for different demographic groups, I think you could also make something of a case for Black and African American students actually showing somewhat slightly less change in the fall of 20 over the previous 3 years or so. Their scores are still way, you know, unacceptably below white students. So I'm also, you know, trying to compare what data we've seen for elementary students and listening to the discussion of what the data seems to be saying about secondary students. I wonder if there are differences here in those the experience of students between K through 6 and 7 through 12 that we may need to understand, we may need to look at very carefully to see what we need to be doing in the future here. I really hesitant, to have a very deep discussion about data that I'm just seeing an hour and a half ago or so. But I think there's something to be said for being very careful about how we examine this data.
All right, we're kind of hitting a quiet spot. Matt, I mean, you made it through the presentation. Was there some other things that your team wanted to share that wasn't in that presentation?
I don't know, Sean, we could go on all night if you let us talk about teach and learning. You might not want all the things we have to share, but
Well, I've got the agenda sitting on the side of my screen.
you're-
I'm seeing the giant list of
of
stuff
other-
we still have to get to.
chances to get to some other things here, but no, I think we hit a lot of the highlights and the big points we wanted to make as far as that work that's been going on and that has continued. And Charlie has a great point, just maybe to wrap it up around the data is at a slice in time. And so that's what we do. And that's the work we live and breathe, is trying to look at those data points and what they tell us, and not overreact, but not underreact, and try to just look for continual improvements and efforts to be the best we can be for the kids we serve and the families we serve. So that's all for us on this topic, Sean.
All right, did you need maybe some nodding heads on what your recommendation is in regards to the waiver? I mean, I would tell you what my personal reaction to it is that we have to do something. It's getting real bad. Talking to epidemiologists at the university, it's bad here and across the state. Also talking to teachers, they really want a chance to see their B kids before it happens, and parents need that time for their younger kids to circle the wagons and find potential childcare and stuff. So Monday makes the most sense to me. I don't know that we're needing a vote on this unless board members are in complete disagreement on things. So I guess I'd just get a feel to make sure that I'm not speaking out of turn here.
I'm not in disagreement. I just had a question that I know you had mentioned, Matt, earlier, that there may be some buildings that, with the number of cases going on, that might have to close before that time frame. How will you communicate that with the public and or the board? And sort of another part, what happens if we have staff members that actually decide not to send their kids to school for the rest of the week and they need to take leave? I'm just thinking about all the what ifs.
Sure. So on the staff member equation, if they would take leave from work and we would work to, provide a sub for them, they would just need to be able to use the appropriate leave in that scenario. As far as if we had a building that needed to close.
Before you go on, I mean, I think just the best advice for teachers listening is to contact Chris Mead or Lindsay Detra at the beginning, and they can help enter the right leave so we don't have to go back around and change it. There are some COVID leave options available. And so it's a good reminder, Athena, but really instead of trying to just get in and enter their own on ASOP, reach out to Chris or Lindsay, and they can help walk through the steps on that.
Thanks for that.
Nick, anything else to add? I think that covers it.
I think that's good on that. And I think as far as if we had to pull a building down or close a building, we'd honestly handle the communication a lot like we would a weather communication. We would do a call to families, a call to staff. We would let the board know in that sense, and we'd let them know that they're going to start the closure time period sooner. And so obviously that notice would go out prior to that day. We would try to do something the night before, as like we try to do with a weather closure. So we're hopeful that doesn't happen. We need to try to get through 3 days, but if that's the case, then we would follow a lot of the same pattern we use around weather.
Yeah, and I appreciate the recommendation because I do watch the COVID data on the government's website every day, and I do have a concern that our positivity rate for the county continues to go up. And I would like to move as quickly as possible, but I too have heard from staff particularly teachers in the building wanting that time with the students that they haven't seen, but especially from parents who have said, making that move that quickly just isn't feasible for them because of the nature of their job, and they have to plan for childcare. They had heard we applied for a waiver, and it was just no way for them to change their plans that quickly. So while it doesn't seem as fast for some, which, we're in a no-win situation here. We're not going to make everybody happy with whatever decision we make, but I do appreciate you and the team applying for the waiver and coming fully prepared with the recommendation.
Matt, I support what Ruthina and Sean both said. Support the recommendation wholly. The only other thing I would add is for us to have a chance to have our students get back to school after Thanksgiving break. I'm just going to urge community members to wear masks, be smart about gathering, do what we need to do to prevent the spread. And I'll look forward to the conversation on the 24th to see where we are in terms of positivity rates. But I really would like to see our kids come back to school after Thanksgiving break, but I'm not so sure that might be possible unless we get the spread under control. And so for folks who are wanting kids back in school in a hybrid model, advocate to your friends and family members, co-workers, colleagues in our community to follow all of the proper safety guidelines that we have in place so that we can get our kids back into school buildings.
I do have one question, and I know that the state really ties our hands with not being able to think differently about extracurricular activities. Although I do think our folks in extracurriculars have been doing an excellent job. Since we are going to close Monday and we're going to go into kind of our intensive sanitation mode, I wonder if it's at all possible to maybe open up some facilities on Sunday, like gyms, to let any folks kind of wrap up some things that they were, planning in the upcoming week, just to kind of, finish up some activities that they were getting ready for. I don't know if that's possible.
Chase, I saw you unmute. You can go ahead and go first, and then I'll say what I was thinking.
I didn't mean to. No, JP, I was actually looking at Scott to see if Scott wanted to say anything. We have athletic council, activities council with our ADs on Friday morning, and Scott's done a nice job of kind of talking to them about us moving this direction or the potential of it. In terms of facilities, the ADs and the coaches have been really good about working on designing plans of when they can be in those facilities and when not. And so we'll continue to operate that plan until Monday, which is when the state ties our hands on that. I don't want to talk in generalities about us opening any of the facilities, but we'll continue to work with our ADs and our individual coaches to make sure that they're not left or they're left in the best possible position considering the circumstance as we move into that dormant period starting next week. Scott, anything you want to add to that?
I was just going to tell JP that we're between fall seasons and winter seasons right now. So a couple sports have started this week. I know bowling, for example, started on Monday, but like wrestling and boys basketball don't start till next week as well. So it's different than in the fall where they had, practiced all August long and actually competed a couple times and then had to pause. So it's still not ideal. Those kids love their activities, obviously, but it's the very, very beginning, and some haven't even started yet, JP.
And I think I heard something about dance.
I don't know, Scott, do you know anything on the dance piece? I was just going to give one other difference.
I mean, it's all extracurriculars that
Yeah.
have to be suspended during that time, all in-person extracurricular activities, I should correct myself and say. And so dance, cheerleading, any of those components or other extracurriculars can't meet in person either. And so I do think, when we look at facilities and some of those things, I mean, the things we have to be a little bit careful about are kids in there and how they're supervised, and if kids try to organize a practice on their own or anything like that. So those will be the things we work through with the athletic directors and try to make sure we navigate over the course of time. And I think, there's good intentions around what you're asking there. And so we'll figure out, a good plan moving forward around those spaces.
That is, Matt, the one you kind of alluded to, the one piece I was going to come back to, and piggybacking off what Scott said about some of the differences from the summer and the fall and now is that, cross country, the coach could, or they could come up with what they wanted to do virtually, and kiddos could go out and run on their own. A quarterback could go out on his own and throw routes on one of the fields to a receiver. We don't have that same luxury because of us closing down the buildings. We aren't going to be able to provide, as Matt was saying, just those open gym type atmospheres from a health and safety standpoint, both from the COVID perspective, but also just student safety in terms of being there. And so that is a change where outside you can do more things, and we just aren't going to be able to open up our indoor spaces for that type of informal student-led activity like students were able to do in the fall, which is disappointing.
And we could come back with some more of that on the 24th if the board wants to talk about that in more detail. Now give us a chance to meet with Activities Council based on this recommendation tonight. So Sean, back all the way to your original question. I didn't necessarily know if you guys would vote on it tonight. I didn't think you probably would, but it does sound like there's support for that unless, people had different thoughts. So
I'm generally supportive of your plan here, and I think it's definitely appropriate considering the infection rate that's going on in the county now. I'm very interested in doing whatever the district can do, what we can do to support efforts in the community like the NEST initiatives to provide as much support as possible to students that are going to be at home now. And I hope we can work with that group as Chase and Joan and others of us have been meeting with them and other groups in the community to provide that additional support. There's also some discussion, I think, that's much broader than what we can get into tonight about looking at the stress that students are described as being subjected to or dealing with, especially elementary students, who seem to be, according to people I've heard, that stress seems to be coming from being a part of what we're asking students to do online, and not being able to quite master that. So I know that's an instructional set of issues that are deep and complex, but it's I think I would ask as we go forward in planning, especially for the online period, extends very far, that we convince ourselves that what we're asking students to do is within their capabilities.
I guess I'll echo Charlie. I would echo everybody's points, and I support. I guess I agree that we should go online full time. I understand the difficulty this places on families, especially parents who have extra, like 2 or 3 jobs, and find it hard to be at home and supervise their kids and make sure that they're doing all that they need to do online. I'll just also urge that as we go online, that we don't neglect to pay attention to the students who are falling behind, so that the gap is not widened by the time we resume or we come back physically into the buildings.
All right, well, I think we have the direction that we're going, Matt. So unless there's objections, I think we need to move on in our agenda, which would go all the way back to the item that was pulled from consent, which was item number 11, the Securely contract. JP, you pulled it. I don't know if you wanted to start the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, my big question and concern are about data and student data. What data are we collecting? What data is Securely collecting? How long do they keep it? What do they do with it? And what are their protocols for making sure it remains safe? So those are my big questions around securely.
So sure, I'm going to have Adam talk about the technology side a little bit. And if there's anything else related to care assessment or things like that, Kate, or I can take some of those questions. But I remember a previous conversation, I think around some of this, and I do think a thing for the district to probably look at is what are those specifications or what are our look fors? And my guess is Adam can talk through some of those a little bit, but there might be a further conversation at a future work session or to that level, because data seems to come up for us a lot as more of these things transition to media, multimedia sources, and more of our data is shared online. You know, what is our expectation? What are our requirements for that? And so whatever Adam can do to answer those questions, I'm sure he'll do tonight in specific to this product. But then if there's additional conversation we want to continue to have around that and what kind of the district standard is for that, we can sure come back to it later too. So Adam, anything you want to add just kind of on the standard that Securely has or uses there? And we know this is foggy for board members because we also did these presentations a long time ago. And so even though they would have touched on some of those things, that was quite a bit of time ago since we've had that and bring this to you tonight.
Sure. So I can speak to some of those questions as it relates to data security and student data privacy. Securely, as many of you know, is a product that we've used for a long time for its content filtering service. What's on the agenda tonight goes beyond the content filtering service. It's their 24 and safety cloud service. It's still based upon the same technology, however. There's no additional software that gets installed with the addition of the 24 service. So it's still relying on the same Chrome plugin, which is how it works. So we deploy a Chrome plugin to district-owned devices and district issued student accounts, Google accounts, I should say. And essentially what that does is it serves as a content filter, and in doing so, also intercepts certain search terms. So it might be search terms that happen, it might be the classification, the genre classification of websites being visited, which can range from innocuous to those things that we block, such as pornography, for instance, or hate sites. And so it's collecting that information about what students are searching for, what their what sites they're visiting, that sort of thing. And that also applies to search engines that exist within, for instance, YouTube. It also applies to posts that are made with district devices. This wouldn't apply. There is no plugin that we deploy at all for personal phones or things like that, but it would apply as well to social media sites visited, again, with a district issued Chromebook, that sort of thing. In terms of the privacy itself, I mean, in this industry, you never have a perfect guarantee that data is not going to be compromised. So what we really look for are terms of service agreements that, frankly, are in most cases that are certified by independent third parties. As a district, we don't have the resources to pour through. I can look for the keys. I can look to see that they agree to the third-party official authorization components of FERPA, and that they state that they comply with FERPA. I can look to see if they state that they comply with COPA, FERPA being the Federal Educational Records Protection Act, and COPA, the Children's Online, Privacy. I'm actually blanking on COPA for right now, but Children's Online Privacy Law. And so we actually look to a number of organizations. One of the ones we look to is iKeepSafe, which was founded by state attorneys general mostly a number of years ago, and Securely did get iKeepSafe certification for FERPA, as well as California's student privacy certification, which is the most strict in the nation. They got that about 4 or 5 years ago. So we look at that as evidence that they are meeting those guidelines, which say that the district owns the data. The district can request that data be destroyed. Data may not be used for, student data may not be used for marketing purposes. data that's collected may not be used for marketing purposes, it may not be sold, and it may not be provided to any third parties except for third parties, and I don't know that there are in the case of Securely, but except for third parties that are involved explicitly in the delivery of the service. So every now and then you might contract with one company to provide a service, and as part of that, they have a third party that processes something, and so that third party may have access to some of that data. Again, per federal law, they would be bound by FERPA and the protection of educational records. So that's kind of the technology overview and what we look at in terms of data and what we've looked at in terms of Securely specifically. So I'll open it for other questions, or if there are questions about the usage side.
I don't have so much of a question, but can you help me remember? I feel like we did a work session back before COVID, so 37 years ago, but we had both Securely and Gaggle come and answer a lot of these questions and address a lot of the concerns. So, and those work sessions are recorded, I believe. So if people in the public are interested, I think in a more deep dive, that recording and information is certainly available. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely, Lisa. That was a work session item, and it was Gaggle and Securely, and we walked through both of those and explained the intent and around the purpose around them. Even some of this data security piece that Adam just talked through would be on there, or a topic of that too. So public could definitely go back and check out that conversation. But like you said, it was pre-COVID, so it's in the back of all of our memories for sure.
Yeah, well, it's not in the back of my memory. It's well out of my memory by now. So Matt, can you just briefly describe why we need this software?
Sure. So I think when you really think about the need for this, and when we talk about care assessment, a big part of the care assessment, and more commonly referred to as threat assessment work, we know we're doing the Virginia model, the Dewey Cornell model that helps us talk about how we evaluate threats. A big part of that is we're trying to avoid those things from ever happening. It's prevention focused, and we want to try to prevent as many of those. And so this really would help identify mass harm or self-harm events, and trying to either get assistance to kids or stop those events from ever occurring in the first place. And so that's really the intention. We're not looking for those simple disciplinary things. These are really the high level concerns we'd have about kids hurting themselves or hurting a mass amount of people. And so that's really where this work was born out of, and the reason to try to have something that would help us alert to those very serious and dangerous situations that we could try to intervene in a positive way for the students.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to make sure I have the numbers clear. It looks to me it's an additional, it's about $29K per year for 3 years on top of what we're already paying Securely for the service that we already have. Do I have that right?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Yeah, I was going to say yes, Sean, that's correct.
So that what's on the board docs is showing the difference between basically what we're already paying and then an additional thing. Is the cost or service, or a little bit of both, how we landed on Securely? Because we did have the walkthroughs with both those groups, and I don't know that, at least I guess maybe my memory is no good. I don't remember that we landed somewhere after those work sessions on one of those two companies. I know I had my feelings on where we were at with them, but I guess I kind of like to know how we landed on Securely versus the other one. So
we believe the direction from the board at that time was to come back with a recommendation for which one to go forward with, that they both presented a high quality product. I will say, and I guess Adam or Kate could correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Gaggle was the more expensive of the two options. And so cost is always a consideration when you're in an environment with limited funds, but it wasn't the only consideration. There was other components with that as well, but that was the one the team looked at and evaluated and made a recommendation back to. Part of that's also probably influenced by our existing relationship with Securely a little bit, and the ability to work effectively with their product. So, but yeah, cost-wise, this would have been the cheaper of the two options.
Well, I pulled it, and I remember saying specifically that on this one, I'm going to lean heavily on advice from staff. So I'll move to approve the Securely 24 service.
Second.
I'm muted. Is there any further conversation from directors? All right, Kim, I think we are ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, thank you, Kim. All right, we've still got quite a bit to do, so we're going to move on down to our teaching and learning reports. Kind of hit the highlights from this year on some of this stuff, so we'll have to see what last year brings. So I'll turn it over to the team.
Sure, and I'll just ask Amy to go ahead and kick this one off for our team here tonight.
Thank you, Matt. So you received a report that's 56 pages long, and then we tried to just pick up some highlights from the report to speak to this evening. The first few slides are going to talk about demographics, then we move into some of the academic data, followed by some of our behavior data, and then some report outs from different committee work that we've been doing. So just as a quick aside, the annual SIAC committee report, annual wellness report have been standalones previous to the last couple of years, but we've embedded them in the annual progress report now the last 2 years. Diane's going to speak to our curriculum reports being delayed. This is typically the evening that we would also have given you an update. So she'll share that in a minute. The next slide just really details demographics. And on this slide, we're really just looking at comparisons from the previous year. We'll come, of course, back to with certified enrollment numbers for this current year. Hopefully within the next couple of board meetings, we can have that to share out. But if you look at the 18-19 school year versus the 19-20, our district found ourselves growing by about 286 students. So that was a nice increase there, maybe a little bit smaller than we'd seen in some earlier, more recent years. With our free and reduced price lunch students, we actually saw a little bit of decline last year. You could see dropping about 0.4 percentage points there. And then, as has been the trend, if you would look more than just the 2 years that we have represented here, we continue to see a number of our white students in the district continue to slowly decline, with the number of minority students then picking up. And this has been a trend that we've seen for a while now as well. And then another set of demographics on the next page, Kristen, just now we have like about a 5-year comparison here for our students receiving special education services, English language learning services, as well as our preschool students. Special education students, you can see there that we trended a little bit up there with about a percentage increase in growth over there, that 5-year period. Our English language learners, I think we're all really cognizant of the fact that we continue to have English language learners in our district increasing in droves almost with nearly 90 languages, and probably even a little bit more than that this year being spoken. It's exciting to see our preschool numbers. We've been working hard to increase both students on site as well as in our partner agencies. And with that, we're going to move into some of the academic data. So got a little bit of information here on Iowa assessments, but I don't anticipate that Diane will spend very long on this one since we did not give the assessment last spring.
Yes, this is certainly the year of the asterisks when we think about this report, because due to the COVID closure in the spring, there's many of our assessment pieces that we just aren't able to produce for you. ISASP is one of them. So again, as you know, that was new in 18-19, and we didn't even have that data back in time for the 18-19 report. So we shared that with you last January. And so we've just included that information in this report. So we have it in one of our APRs. We sure would have hoped to have included spring 2020, but we were not able to give that assessment, and that assessment was waived from the state due to COVID. On the next slide there, We also have some other academic data in there. Some of it's accurate. So the ACT scores are in there. They continue to rank above the state and national average. Our kids do really well with that. We have our graduation rate in there at 90.4%. That's remained consistent over the last few years. And you'll notice that the graduation rate is always reported 1 year behind the rest of the data. That's just due to the timing that we get that from the state. But due to COVID, again, in the spring closure, our FAST data, we were not able to report spring data. So we did put in winter data, but just being cautious in the way that you are, I guess, comparing the winter data to previous spring data. Winter data is always a little bit lower than the spring. So those results just have to be interpreted cautiously. And then just a note that it doesn't really seem to matter what data point that we are looking at. We continue to see achievement gaps with our ELL students, our FRL students, our IEP students, and certainly our Black and African American students and our Hispanic Latino students. So I'm going to turn it over to, I think maybe Laura or Kate on the student behavior statistics.
Okay, I can go ahead and start and then hand it off to you, Laura. The area that I'll first review with you is the in and out of school suspension data. And overall, you can see that our in and out of school suspensions have been decreasing really over the last 3 years. There was a bit of a spike and a little higher in 2017 and 18. And we really attribute that to a lack of training for new administration applying our policies. I do work with all of our administrative teams in reviewing suspensions every trimester. And what I would say is, and we've been doing that for the last 4 or 5 years. And the content of these meetings really has shifted over the years. So first, our discussions were really ensuring that our principals knew and understood policies and procedures surrounding student discipline with changes that we implemented after the Georgetown project. At that time, we really wanted to make sure that students were not being suspended for minor violations like cell phone violations or attendance issues. And we really were seeing quite a bit of that. And we wanted to reserve suspensions really for our most serious offenses. We have focused on reducing out of school suspensions for discipline infractions also that are more subjective in nature, like defiance, disrespect, and insubordination. I'd say that our conversations have really changed over time. Now principals are focusing on strategies and interventions that they can employ in lieu of suspensions, so that's good news. There's more focus on restorative practices, mediations, and are working to roll out right now a new curriculum called Ripple Effects to help students learn when problematic behavior occurs. So we are working to embed culturally responsive policies and practices related to student behavior and discipline with the goal of reducing disproportionality in student discipline, as you can see still exists and is concerning. So we are really looking forward to our work in this area. And I'll hand that over to Laura.
Good evening again, everyone. Some of the things that Kate shared with you, you can stay on that same side, thank you, really resonate with also when we look at majors office referrals. And so an ODR stands for an office discipline referral, and that can be a what's called a major that our Iowa Department of Education defines and shares with all schools various definitions for problem behavior. And then also a problem behavior, an ODR, can rise to the level of a suspension. So what Kate was just talking about were those higher level suspendable type behaviors and office discipline referral. And then also in your APR report on, well, at least on the one I'm looking at, is page 37 for the office referrals. Then that would be the page that gives the data related to the majors. And over time, then on that following page, you can see how for the office referrals that are major behaviors, we've also seen that decline from the 2017-18 school year to the 2018-19 school year. Of course, we saw a decline last year, but that's again because we were basically missing the last 3 months of school. But some of the reasons that our social emotional behavioral team and our lead PBIS team would attribute that decline over the previous few years would be just due to a higher level of district leadership regarding fidelity of implementation for PBIS. Again, kind of resonates with some of the things that Kate said, that you start to a certain extent with just the procedural aspect of the data entry and what the definitions are, and making sure that buildings have their preventative aspect of PBIS in place, and then also making sure that there is validity and reliability in the data entry, and so that the state definitions are used, and that buildings actually learn through their PBIS Tier 1 training process the process to implement, to follow for that, to make sure that there is that validity in the process. So then in examining the data, that database decision making is one of the key parts of a healthy MTSS system, is using that data on a regular basis. What PBIS teaches buildings is your big 5 reports on a monthly basis, to take a look at those. So for example, it's, what are the highest areas in the school that may have office referrals? What is the time of day? There's some data protocols that are used at the building level to determine where some areas of focus and need may be. And PBIS is really just a problem-solving framework using that data to then inform what systems you have in place and what practices to put in place. We've learned over time, and a big emphasis now is really that third bullet in the slide here, is that continuing to work on that PBIS as a framework to implement culturally responsive teaching practices. As I mentioned earlier in tonight's meeting, the social emotional learning competencies, that's really kind of the bulk of what we want to teach students. And all of that kind of falls under that lens of equity. And so tying all of that together over the course of the last several years is likely to have contributed to a slight decline in those office discipline referrals. We still know that the data is disproportionate and that we have a higher number of Black and African American students receiving office referrals. So we have a lot more work to do in that regard. I'm really excited and looking forward to the discipline protocols and procedures and the PBIS using the restorative practices to embed within that process. That starts, I think our first meeting is Monday with that group. And so that, I think, will really help us examine our district level of fidelity with implementation, where some areas of need continue to be, and some areas that we have worked on. And maybe that's why we've seen some of those results. And so that's just kind of a high, broad level overview. There's so much more I could share, but I think, with some of the things that I mentioned earlier in tonight's meeting, and connecting that to what I was just mentioning just now, that kind of takes care of it for now, unless anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Laura.
I'm sorry, Amy. Sean, do you want to have questions now or wait until the full presentation?
Go ahead if it's one of the topics here that we're talking about.
Okay, sure. This is on as relates to office referrals. 2 questions then, Matt or Laura. One, can we eventually get unduplicated office referral data in this report? And we've been at, we've talked about this several times in the past, and I wonder if it's possible. And 2, if the staff sees that they would be going to the work of getting it into the report would actually be helpful. The suspension data is now shows unduplicated suspensions, and that to me is helpful because half the suspensions are occurring with with the same student.
Really,
And then,
I'm sorry, I was just going to answer that part first.
So go ahead, Laura.
I don't see any problem with that. And if we missed, or if I missed, that request before.
Well, it didn't come when I was on the board. It came when we were in the equity committee. So,
oh, okay.
Perhaps not as official. So,
yeah, I believe we could. I don't want to make that as 100% certainty if there's some reason we can't pull that data, but that would be really great information to have. So I will definitely make a note of that.
okay. And then the second question, I would like us to get to the point fairly soon where we can relate or correlate numbers of office referrals with academic achievement for students to see what the effect actually seems to be anyway.
Thank you, Charlie. I alluded to something earlier in tonight's meeting when I referenced yesterday during our elementary principal and IDS meeting. Our SEBH team, which is essentially our PBIS leadership team, had just designed a process to take a look at this year's FAST data results with the attendance data, with any other anecdotal data that the buildings had, to really try to look at the connection between the academic and the behavioral data, and to identify, have them kind of go through a process and look at, are there any students that you had not, already had on your radar just by looking at this data. And the great news is that really we didn't have enough time for every single building to share out, but it wasn't shocking. Buildings were like, well, yeah, we maybe discovered a few things here and there, but that convergence of data and really looking at any data that relates to social emotional learning as academic data. We have to have the engagement. There has to be an inclusive, safe learning environment in order for students to be able to learn. I so appreciate you making that comment. And I'm sure that's shared by the rest of the board too, because we really have to look at the whole child. So I'm sure we have more work to do with that, but being able to make those connections between academic achievement and our behavioral data too is important. So I know that wasn't a question. I just added a little commentary there, but we're on the same page about that.
Good. It was very good commentary. Thank you, Sean, for allowing me to proceed.
Thank you, Kristen. So next up is information around our School Improvement Advisory Committee report. Last year, this is a board appointed committee, and each year we do appoint that committee during the board organizational meeting. And so that'll be coming up again. But last year we met with the committee on January 28th. And at that time, we asked the committee to review or look through 4 different documents. And we just had the approval, I think just maybe even the month prior to that, with the district's new diversity, equity, inclusion plan. So that was integral to the work that night, or to what that group looked at. Also, we have our strategic plan that we asked them to look over. And then we would have had real recent data. Again, Diane shared that we had shared it with the board, that the ISAS data. And we would have also just given the Iowa, their annual progress report. So we had them looking at those 4 documents. And as they were thinking through or reading through those documents, we were really trying to get them to focus on the major educational needs in the districts and student learning goals and long-range academic and behavioral goals. And that's actually language pulled out of the Iowa Code as to the lens that we should be doing this work. And so within each of those 4 documents, there were either questions being raised or recommendations being offered, or just things to consider within the various documents. And that's what I had outlined or shared fairly verbatim with what the individual committee members were asking or commenting on that evening. And so you can find that on pages 31 and 32 in the APR there.
So although I've shared probably more comprehensive thoughts on some other topics tonight, I'll be a little bit more brief with the annual wellness report, just mostly because we haven't been able to make a great deal of progress since the last meeting, which would have occurred throughout the school year last year. But what was recognized at that point with the wellness committee was just a need to kind of push the reset button, to take a look at the great work that had already been done by the wellness team, over the past number of years. Maybe getting a little bit more representation and diverse representation on the wellness committee moving forward. And that's what we mean by that, reestablishing it. And then a big focus that was recognized as being need to be communicated and highlighted this year. And so we have yet to do that. But we do think it's extremely important is just to revisit that wellness policy, which particularly is about the smart snack requirements. And one area too that we want to work closely with is making sure that any kind of positive reinforcements plans that are being implemented for our students, as much as possible, also align with those smart snack requirements. So that's an area that we're going to continue to work on. And then, of course, just continuing to focus on serving breakfast, in each of the buildings. In those last couple of bullets, I'm actually not well versed in being able to say where we are at currently with the farm to school collaboration and school gardens, but that was, again, an area that we recognized the last time the committee met. We just needed to collect some data, know kind of our current reality, what is actually currently in place, and then what we needed to do to move forward. Jess Jimerson is, as our health services specialist, is the individual who leads the wellness committee. But again, these were just some areas that the committee as a whole wanted to focus on during the current school year.
And then our last slide just talks about a report that you're not going to find, which is the curriculum review reports. Usually we do share those in the fall, like Amy had said. But last year we were supposed to be reviewing art and music. We typically review every curricular area on an 8-year cycle. Sometimes it gets extended to 9 or 10, depending on what our budget looks like. But the art and music one had to pause because of COVID. So we will continue those this year. And then we are also beginning social studies this year. In fact, our first committee meeting is next week. So we should have 3 reports to share with you next fall. And with that, I think we're on to questions.
All right, I really appreciate that report. I know it's kind of weird to be looking back at, back to a year that was kind of normal for part of it, where we're at now. And so I don't really have any questions about that data, but a couple points that kind of popped into my head that was in that report as we look towards this year, things that I'll be curious to see how it goes is one, I'm really curious to see what our preschool numbers look like this year, because I see a lot of folks not sending their kids to preschool. So I'd be curious as to how that plays out. And the other thing that really stood out to me is I'm wondering how some of the restorative practices and circles and things like that, that we were really kind of getting into gear, how that works when everybody, or at least half the people, are not there, right? Just how that works in practice. I'm curious as to how that's going to play out this fall and ongoing. So those are just some thoughts as to how I'm transferring last year's data into this crazy year that we're having. So I'll let other directors weigh in on if they have questions on this data.
Diane, this is Charlie. Could you just remind me when the social studies curriculum review will be concluded?
So the review is never concluded.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Right. Concluded, but the committee will conclude their meetings this year. And then typically what happens is the committee comes up with an improvement plan that will last then for the next 7 or 8 years. And part of that improvement plan will certainly be to review new materials. So that can probably last into next school year as well. But then we constantly have different initiatives and different strategies and different goals that we will try to address throughout the next few years. And if you want any more information on the social studies review, I'm going to turn over to Brady Schott, who's right here, and he's our social studies coordinator. He's leading that process for us.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. So Charlie, on that, it's a great question. So the self-study part of the curriculum review process is really what happens first. And there's three, I guess, objectives, of that. It was to evaluate the data that you have surrounding any of your curricular programs. On the basis of that data evaluation, identify strengths and limitations of your program, and then develop, as Diane mentioned, a plan of action that'll take you to some immediate steps as well as longer term steps based on the strengths and limitations. And so we'll have 3 meetings. Our target, at least, is to have 3 meetings with the possibility of some subcommittees off of that team, so that we can try to conclude that investigation, or that part of the curriculum review process, the self-study part of it, yet this academic year. And then, sort of a strand of that is evaluation of your curricular materials and the things that might be out there from publishers, or that we would create ourselves, that also, sort of runs in tandem with that, to a degree.
Okay, thanks, Brady. And I'm sure I'm supposed to know this by now. After all, I've been on the board nearly a year. But so when does the board then get an update on the process, so that we have some input? We're able to give that input before the end of the process.
Well, remember on this one too, Charlie, this is related to our equity update that we're doing. This is a key part of that equity work this year and part of those recommendations. So you'll be receiving updates on that as we go through the school year about where that progress is at. And then when we have a deliverable from that committee, of course, that'll be presented during that portion of the meeting too. So as we continue to have those equity updates, we'll keep updating you on the social studies review.
And we board member Ruthina has graciously agreed to be a member of that committee. So if you have input, please share it with her, and I'm sure she'll share it with the committee.
Good, thank you.
I just had a question about kind of the AP and the college prep. Could we in the future get demographic breakdowns of the participation in our honors AP, the PSEO, and the Kirkwood Academies, and demographic breakdown on the number of AP exams?
Yeah, I know we can get that on the AP exams. We will work on all of that for you.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else with questions or comments? All right, thanks everyone. We can move on. I believe our next presentation is all about the money. I'm assuming I'm turning this over to Les.
Yeah, Les is pulling his stuff up there. I'll give him a little filler time here, but yeah, he's going to take the next 2 components here for us and walk you through the quarterly financial report, and then the financial health report and the CAR report, and kind of give you some big takeaways there this evening. So Les, go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. And good evening, board members and other directors. I feel kind of like we're at Thanksgiving dinner here, that you've had the potatoes, the gravy, and the stuffing all night. And now I'm going to try to pile a little dessert on top of you and make you feel really miserable. But nonetheless, you do have 3 reports, and I'm kind of going to go in reverse order. The financial health report and the CAR report are really a look back on last year, how we finished fiscal year 19-20, and some of the key statistics and trends of that report. So, as looking at the financial health report, you will see that we did fall back in several of the categories slightly in our performance. That was due a lot to we made the budget adjustments, but then we had the large enrollment increase and had to bring back some of those staff. And so we weren't able to make all of the gains that we had hoped to in the prior year with some of those cuts. And so that just recaps that. The CAR report just pulls some comparative information over a couple years that's pulled out of the CAR. And let me back up. The CAR stands for Certified Annual Report. That's a financial report uploaded to the Department of Ed annually each September. And it just basically pulls out of a school's general ledger, and all 330 plus schools in Iowa are required to do that. And then from those reports, then you'll ultimately see some reports that like IASB will put out that compares all school districts across the state. That's where they're really getting their financial data, is from that CAR. So over time here in the next couple months, when you see those IASB reports, you'll know where that data comes from and how Iowa City gets their information into that, so that they can compare district to district in some of those numbers. Probably the more important report tonight for you is the quarterly financial report. And it's just that. It's what we do is each quarter, same format that you've seen previously. This one is for the quarter ending September 30th. So while it does represent 25% of the year, it doesn't really represent 25% of the activity, because we barely started school by the time this report was put in place. We'd only paid our teachers and many of our staff once or twice, and they're paid, teachers are paid over 12 pays during the year, and our other staff are paid somewhere between 19 and 20 times if they're on a timesheet employee or a pay per punch type employee. So you will see some numbers in there that look a little bit confusing as to why aren't they at 25% level in some of the detail expenditures when you compare those. But that's why we compare year over year, so that you can see some of those from a comparison perspective. Matt made a comment, and I believe another board member did earlier this evening as well, regarding COVID-19 and some of the impact that will have over many years in our teaching and learning. It's going to have some of that same impact to us from a financial perspective as well. Amy mentioned that certified enrollment would be coming in a future report. Well, in me putting this report together, I could not avoid where our certified enrollment was on October 1 of 2020, and that's down 288 students from the prior year. So virtually all of the students that we gained on October 1 of 2019 are now gone. So we're back almost to the 2018 count date level. You've probably seen communication about this. This is not an Iowa City phenomena. This is a statewide phenomena. There's estimates that Iowa's enrollment across the state will be down somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,000 students. Des Moines and Davenport being two of the largest that have reported some numbers close to 1,000 students. So I guess this is a classic example of misery loves company, but it does have some implications. And so I have included the impact of those budget to the impact to the budget from that decreased enrollment, because that is the primary driver for our budget. The other piece will be the supplementary state aid that the legislature will approve, hopefully in late January, early February, so that we're able to move forward from that. I believe you have legislative priorities on your agenda either this time or at the next meeting. And so it probably is very important that we advocate strongly for a higher SSA next year, just like we do every year. And I know that UEN is already putting together their initiatives. IASB probably will be doing the same thing next week at their virtual conference. So it's going to be a cumulative effort as we move forward. So our budget will present a challenge for the district as we move forward, losing those students for next year. Even if all 280 of those students come back to us sometime over the next several months and prior to October 1 of 2021, we won't get the benefit of that until our 21-22 budget, a whole nother year down the road. So there's no immediate impact, and that's why I say that it does have a multi-year impact. And losing that enrollment as your denominator doesn't give you anything to build on that. It's a math problem, so to speak, and it continues to build on itself. We will continue to present that. I've met with Matt and Chase and Amy on a couple of occasions to start the discussions of where we will go with our budget. And I know Matt's indicated that he certainly wants to get with the board as that as well. So I'm not going to get into great detail tonight until we've had more time to work together on this issue. But if you do look at the 21-22 budget with the reduction of those 288 students, and at this point I've just assumed a 1% state SSA. That's about where we've been for several of the last couple years, and it's been the same number that we've used in previous quarterly reports as we look at that fiscal year. We would essentially be in a flat budget perspective for next year. We would be on the budget guarantee, which is a function of the aid and levy process that guarantees a district that loses enrollment in 1 year does not have a huge budget cut in the following year because of that loss of enrollment. But that's a one-time factor. So if we go down another 200 students next year, we don't get the impact of that budget guarantee. But I will be bringing that budget guarantee back to you after the first of the year. It takes district action or board action to approve that. But the budget guarantee is funded 100% by property taxes. So that will come back and be a local impact. That's not something that we can change in how the formula works. It's just the way it's set up. But it does allow us to at least keep our budget relatively revenue neutral for 1 year based upon those loss of students. One of the things that was fairly consistent in our enrollment is we lost students in all the categorical areas. Our special ed count was down, our preschool count was down significantly, and you will see on that report, if you compare the preschool revenues for next year based upon the count, we're down $500,000 in preschool revenues for next year. So that will take some discussions as to how we do that. Another significant piece is our current year budget includes a very significant spike in Title I revenues this year from about 2.3 or 2.4 million to 3.7 million. And Diane's done a great job of working with those resources and using those resources to serve our students on the teaching and learning side. But my big concern is because that's a formula driven based upon the state allocation, that may not be a revenue stream that we can count on next year. So I have dropped our miscellaneous income next year and reflected that also as a separate line item down below in our expenditures for next year. So without getting any further into a deep dive as to any other programs, recognizing that both of those programs have significant items on the revenue side, it was only appropriate that we include those, that recognizing that there may be an adjustment on the expenditure side as well, pending further discussions with the management team and the board as to how we serve our students in those two particular areas. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions, or if Matt or Chase or Amy have any additional comments they'd like to make based upon our discussions that I may have missed.
The only thing I'd add, I guess, Les, thank you for that well done summary there, is as you can tell, like Les showed, I mean, it puts us in a very difficult position for the upcoming year. And Les also alluded to the UEN and ISB trying to get together on a platform or an ask to the state because of districts like ours that haven't been on the budget guarantee and what that could mean for property tax. And knowing the stress that COVID has put on the system here and led to some of this enrollment growth, we do feel like we need to have a very direct ask to the state for assistance and what that assistance is, and try to be aligned in that support throughout the state for some assistance. And so whether that is a increased supplemental state aid ask or using the enrollment figure from the year before, we don't have the final end on that conversation yet, or we don't know what that's going to be, but I would see and anticipate that you're going to hear organizations talking about that to make that direct kind of pitch to the state for what that assistance looks like. So I think that'll be something for us to pay attention to. Like Les said, there's still a lot of variables in play there, but we are going to have to do some significant budget work here over the course of the next several months, looking at that dip in enrollment. Again, important to reiterate, it's not just an us situation, that this was a pattern seen throughout the state in several large districts. And he attributed to some of those factors that we see. And it's hard to anticipate that and to just hope on a wish and a prayer that those kids are going to come back for the fall. I don't think we know that answer. And so if we're going to be responsible with the funds we do have and make sure we're planning an appropriate program, we're going to have to dig into this here in the months to come. So with that, we'd obviously take any questions you have there around it or anything you see that needs some further explanation.
So Les, I have a question about the budget guarantee. So I get that if we've lost 200 students this year, and so we get a 1-year cushion. Next year, if we lose an additional 200 students, do we get a second cushion off of the unanticipated loss? If that makes sense, or that's just it?
You just adjust your budget downward and work forward from there. So yeah, it's a one-time reprieve. And to kind of put that in perspective for us, based upon my preliminary estimates of using the state formula, aid and levy formula, we would need 3.02% state supplemental aid to avoid the budget guarantee for next year. So that tells you how critical that number is, and that advocacy will be for us. And I'm sure there are districts that are in very similar or may need more than that. You know, we can always, there's probably never going to be enough to make us happy and make us want to move forward. But I think, you know, that's a level that we need to get to and really hope for, not only for our budget, but for our community and the impact that has locally. You know, there's some early indications that this Revenue Estimating Conference has put out is that they have estimated fiscal 22 to be positive. And so the state coffers are full and they have very significant reserves. And with the reduction in the number of students across the state that they have to do, there's some pretty strong sentiment across the people that I've talked to and some people that have been involved in lobbying efforts before, that this is a year that they would be able to do something higher and help out districts, especially on that budget guarantee perspective and the impact on property taxes. And with a Republican controlled chambers in Des Moines and they're wanting to avoid the property tax boom, you know, there might be a way to match this up, but I'm hopeful, but that's the best I can say.
Other questions from directors?
No question. I will. One bright spot, our special ed deficit shrank a tiny little bit rather than growing, which is normally the case.
You're right, JP. It did. And I'm concerned that trend may not continue next year because of the ability to provide Medicaid eligible services to some of those employees. That does reduce that deficit to some degree. And I'm not trying to put, you know, that funding source at risk of anything or on the backs of the special ed, but that is a pretty significant piece that comes into us. So not being able to provide those services not only loses the revenue, but it also means that some of our at-risk students aren't getting some of the services that they need as well. So it's really a double whammy there, so to speak, JP.
All right, Les, I appreciate the reports. I know that we're probably going to have some not so pleasant conversations coming this spring, looking at some of these numbers and how they roll forward year over year. So something the dessert, I think is what you called it, Les. So I really appreciate that.
Might be mincemeat pie, I don't know.
Yeah. So if there's no further questions on these, we can move on. Other discussion items. Our discussion item number 2 is on transfers. So I don't know who wants to lead off on this subject.
Sure. So for transfers, I think actually the bulk of the conversation tonight, we wanted to put transfers back in front of the community this evening that we were talking about adjusting the secondary transfer policy potentially to opening Liberty for open enrollments and transfers in the district. But the board also had a question around our climate survey data that was conducted last year that was never given the opportunity to be presented to the board. And so we do have Rachel Mahler here to walk you through some of that data along with the transfer component. So I don't know if there's specific questions on transfers or anything to that. I knew it was kind of one that we wanted to make sure that the community saw multiple times before an anticipated change. And so that's why it's on the agenda here. And then, like I said, along with some of that climate data that Rachel's here to talk through with you all. So first we could take any questions on specific transfers and then turn it over to her for the conversation on climate.
Matt, I have some data for them as well at whatever time you want to do it.
Yeah,
that's all right.
That. So why don't you go ahead and walk through that first, Scott, and then we'll take Rachel's portion next so we don't skip back and forth between transfers and that.
Excellent. Tried to screen share. Can everybody see that? Awesome. I have 3 slides for you. Diane put me on this track. She said, Scott, is there any way to identify whether most of the transfers are related to the Kirkwood and Alexander attendance areas? While I was looking at the secondary part of it, right? And we've got 155 kids here. And rather than ask Lisa to go back through them one by one, what I decided to do was sort them by zip code, where those folks live. And I still think it tells us a picture. Matt has asked me that where any N is less than 10 to black those out, just so that people aren't identified by this demographic. So we have 155 kids, 48 kids are assigned to North Central or Liberty, but are going to Northwest and West, and those live in the Coralville attendance area. So this is item number 1 here. We can attribute that to the Kirkwood attendance area, that those kids want to stay on that campus. The other large area are right here, these 33. So these are 33 kids that are assigned to the Northwest and West attendance area, but they're choosing to go to Southeast and City High. They live in the 52240 zip code, which is Alexander resides in. Now that's not only Alexander that's 52240, but that certainly does hit at that. So of those 2 groups, 48 and 33, that's 81 of our 155 secondary kiddos. So 52% of our transfers are related to those 2 attendance areas. Everything else, as you can see, is essentially 11 or less, just not a lot of movement in the district. And I would like to share that, you know, I know Liberty is closed, but the Northwest to North Central number is very small as well. Only a total of 11 kids from North Central or from Northwest to North Central, and those kids could go without restriction at this point. You would ask me about demographic information, so that's my slide number 2. I'm sorry it's so much smaller, but this is the junior high data. Again, 38% of the movement is attributed from North Central to Northwest. That's our Kirkwood data. 25% of our movement in the junior highs is from Northwest to Southeast. That's our Alexander data. And I showed you this last time, this net up here. North Central's a net loser. Northwest up 17, Southeast is up 11 because of transfers. But if you look at ethnicity, 52% of our students that use the transfer policy for our junior highs are Black or African American. And they represent about 20 to 22% of our population as a whole. And our Hispanic students represent about 12% of our population. So this is pretty close to what we would expect. And if you look at our IEP kiddos, 12% of our IEP kiddos seek a transfer, and that's very close to our district average, slightly above, but very close. And then this was really interesting to me at the junior high. Our FRL outnumbers our non-FRL in terms of use of the transfer. So 56% of our kids that transfer are FRL kids. And then I've got that exact same data for you at the high school. And again, it shows those big areas. This west to city area can be attributed to our Kirkwood or our Alexander kids, excuse me, and our city to west kids. Now I'm stumbling over myself. My Liberty to west kids can be attributed to our Kirkwood kiddos. You can see that city's about neutral. Liberty's down 20, west is up 21. That's for this past year. You can see the ethnicity demographic again, not quite as much as in the junior high, but still our Black and African-American students transfer at the 30% rate. And our IEP kiddos just a little bit higher than our district average. And then it's just about a perfect 50-50 split on our FRL data. So you would ask for all that demographic data and trying to get into some of the nitty gritty. And I'm happy to take some questions, but I don't need to belabor the point if you don't want me to. I know you've been here a long time. I will stop sharing.
All right, thank you, Scott. Amy, did you want to introduce Rachel at all, or do we just want to turn it over to her? Did you have anything else to add?
No, I'm just going to say thanks to Sarah Brock and Rachel Mahler for being here tonight. They were able to get the report and done in fairly short time frame for us, and so we appreciate that. I know that that ask was just more recent for them. So Kim, thank you for allowing them into our side of the show over here. And with that, Rachel, I'll let you start sharing your screen and the presentation.
All right, I do not see this share screen option on my Zoom.
All right, how do I do that for you?
Cool, thanks.
Let me just make sure I've got it pulled up here. All right.
All right, we're off. Okay, well, hi, everybody. We have more data to share, so I hope you're ready for some more data. My name is Rachel, and I'm a research assistant on the Equity Implemented Partnership. And Dr. Sarah Brook is here with us as well, and she's the director of the partnership. So today we want to present with you guys results from the 2020 School Climate Survey that was conducted in the spring. So this was before COVID hit. So I want to begin with just reminding us of the importance of this work. So our partnership has been really focused on how students are experiencing their school climate, particularly the disparities in these experiences. And school climate is the overall culture of a school. It's the norms and values and relationships that make up a school community. And we care about school climate. The reason we focus on it is because there's a lot of evidence out there that shows positive school climates are associated with a variety of student outcomes. And school climate is something that the schools can alter through a purposeful, coordinated effort. Positive school climates and equity go hand in hand. And that really gets at the purpose of this work, to provide the district data on how students are experiencing your schools to inform your efforts to address equity. And first, I want to go over some key findings just right off the bat so you guys know. On average, most students are reporting a positive school climate, but we do see consistent patterns over time in which students with a socially marginalized identity report lower perceptions of the school climate. For example, the key finding 2 shows that inequitable treatment from teachers and with discipline is a reoccurring theme. We also see a lot of bullying and hurtful comments occurring in schools, with students noting a lack of responsiveness about these issues. Students also note a lack of emotional and mental health support in schools and call for more support. And lastly, this last finding highlights the purpose of our work that's focusing on students' voices in the first place. Students don't feel as if they're being heard, and they have a lot of experiences, ideas, concerns that they want to share. So we invited all students grades 5th through 12th to participate in this survey. We sent a link through their school emails. We got a really good response rate of about 78%, and the sample is demographically representative of the district student population. And the great thing about this data is we can disaggregate it by various social identities to look at patterns. So the survey covers 5 main topics as shown on this slide. For the purposes of time, we're just going to be touching on a couple aspects of each of these topics, but I totally encourage you guys to check out the full report on our website, but it's also uploaded to board docs. And then also most of this is going to be covering quantitative data, but we also ask an open-ended question at the end of the survey, and you'll see some quotes in this presentation that reflect that. So first, looking at student-teacher relationships, we see overall most students are reporting positive relationships with teachers, and these relations are pretty consistent over time. And we know that student-teacher relationships have various aspects to them. And looking between these different aspects, we see there's higher levels of students having respect for their teachers. About 95% of students say that, and 93% say that their teachers provide academic support. However, the aspects that are a little lower are ones on student voice. You see only about half of students say that they have a voice in school and class matters. Equitable treatment and personal concern are both at 78%. So this data encourage us to think about certain aspects of teacher relations that you can improve upon, such as inclusion and care and relationships. And we know student-teacher relationships are super important for achievement. So not only is the content of what you're teaching students important, but also their relationship with teachers and feelings of value is also shaping their achievement outcomes. Moving on, we also see, basically we see disparities in all aspects of student-teacher relationships. For example, with equitable treatment, we see that Black students, multiracial students, and those that identify with another race have lower levels of equitable treatment, and you see that with non-binary as well. And this quote, if you want to read it, really illustrates what this experience is like from the student's perspective. All right, and teacher concern is another aspect that we look at. So not only do students with a socially marginalized identity report lower levels of concern overall, but you also notice this gap between your personal and general experiences. And what that means is that for Black and Latino students, they're more likely to perceive that students or that teachers care about students in general than they care about them personally. And so then this is looking at how adults are supporting students in school. You see that students are reporting high levels of academic support, but lower levels of social and emotional support. And an interesting trend is that, or an interesting data point is that ELL students actually report lower levels of academic support compared to non-ELL students, but higher levels of social and emotional support. Students have heard teachers say hurtful comments, and this could be one reason why you see these unequal student-teacher relationships. On average, about 25% of students have heard hurtful comments about race and 24% about sexual orientation. And you can read these quotes here that kind of demonstrate what students are hearing from teachers. And while this isn't shown in the presentation, there's disparities in who is hearing these comments. For example, Black and Latino students are more likely to hear hurtful comments about race. Moving into like the social and peer relationship things, most students are feeling like they belong in your schools. And this has actually slightly increased from 2018. However, we see disparities in feelings of belonging. And this is important because we know that a sense of belonging is associated with positive outcomes for students. And bullying. So as you see, there's a lot of students that are reporting bullying at their schools. You see the highest one is appearance. 43% have seen students bullying each other based on appearance, and about a third about gender and race. And if you read those quotes, these are the kinds of things that students are experiencing in school. And a lot of this is based on social differences. And then looking at this across group differences, we see what we kind of would expect. Students with the identity that's being targeted are more likely to report that bullying. So we see Black and Asian and multiracial students experience more race-based bullying. 60% of non-binary students witnessed bullying in schools is what this one is measuring about gender. So then this next one is asking them personally, have you ever been bullied? And here on average, about 22% of students report being bullied. And this is similar to national averages of about 20%. We see verbal is the most common, followed by social bullying. Elementary students report the highest levels of bullying, followed by junior high and then high school. And then looking at frequency, we see that about half only happens a few times a year, but about 17% of these are happening more than once a week, and a little less than that once per week. And students are hearing a lot of hurtful comments from other students about these different identities. So you see nearly three-fourths of students are hearing hurtful comments about sexual orientation. And a lot of these are different homophobic comments and insults that students often hear in schools. And then looking at just general perceptions of safety, we see that most students are feeling safe in school. And looking at what areas they feel the most safe, they are slightly more likely to feel safe in their classes and traveling between home and school, and are less likely in the hallways and bathrooms and outside around the school. And if you want to read this qualitative information, it shows what students are concerned about in terms of safety. Students talk about fighting, how that is disruptive to them. Verbal aggression and inappropriate language often occurs. Dating and sexual harassment is an issue, as well as substance abuse. And students are also describing a lack of responsiveness by teachers and staff in the school to address bullying and discrimination and harassment. They're really desiring, I think, more action from the district or teachers to address the bullying and hurtful comments that they hear. So given that there's a lot of these kind of negative experiences in school, it's not surprising that students are really asking for more mental and emotional support in school. And reading these quotes really demonstrates how dire, I guess, the situation is for students. Talking about how they don't have anybody to talk to, how they're really struggling and just really need that support from their school. And we can just leave it here for a second so you guys can read that if you want. Or actually, you have it. You actually have it yourself. So if you want to read it, you can. And so for inclusive discussions, we've seen opportunities to talk about race and gender have increased over the years. However, still only about a little over half have opportunities to talk about gender and sexual orientation. And then with inclusive classrooms, if you go to the next slide, we also see disparities in all aspects of it. And this one is just highlighting opportunities to talk about things, but we also see this with inclusive content and feeling unable to share in class due to your race. So again, we see that students with a socially marginalized identity are less likely to think that their classroom is inclusive. Then moving to some discipline stuff, we look at disciplinary equity. You see that about 77% of students report that they are personally disciplined fairly, and less of them see that other students are generally disciplined fairly. And then looking at different practices, about 76% of students think that discipline is transparent, it's consistent, but about 10% less think that it is strict. And looking at group differences, we see that Black students report the lowest levels of disciplinary equity, but then looking at these different practices, we actually see that white and Asian students are reporting lower levels of consistency, strictness, and transparency with the discipline. And then also another pattern to highlight is that non-binary and LGBT students report lower levels of all aspects of the safety and disciplinary environment. And these are some examples of those disparities. In terms of responsiveness, although the comments highlighted a lot of non-responsiveness, looking at this data, most students do say that teachers make it clear bullying is not allowed and they respond to it. However, only 58% say that other students are stopping bullying. And looking at restorative conflict resolution, we have about 3/4 of students that are experiencing these different types of restorative conflict resolution practices. And we're getting kind of to the last couple slides here. So overall, the vast majority of students report that diversity, inclusiveness, and equity are important at their school, which is great. And we see a little less report that students in the school respect each other's differences, but we see high levels of students thinking adults and teachers are respecting each other's differences. But then, unsurprisingly, we again see significant differences by various social identities in their perceptions of how inclusive their school is and how much their school values diversity. So here we see that Black students are less likely to perceive these different aspects. So these results are just some of what we have with a very extensive survey, and they can be super interesting, but the primary purpose of these results is to inform decision-making to create equity in schools. And so the district has committed to this DEI plan, and we kind of want to show how you can align these findings to your plan. For example, the key finding number 4, that students are continuing to say that there's a lack of support, mental and emotional support, speaks to ensuring that you move forward on strategy 3A. Basically, this data is just speaking to the importance of these things and the need to take action on your different strategies. And we would like to acknowledge all of our lovely partners who have helped us in this work and love to answer any questions you guys might have about this data.
Thank you, Rachel and Sarah, for providing this. Just a quick question. Now, you do separate this data out by buildings, correct? And sorry if you're having trouble hearing me. I had to take off my headphones because they were hurting my ears.
We typically do. In the previous years, we provided school profiles for all the schools to look at. This year, however, the partnership ended right when we finished last spring, when we finished the report. So we did not have the capacity to make individual school profiles for the 2020 survey.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't think I have any questions. I appreciate the data. I appreciate this survey over time. I think it really has informed a lot of the policies we're doing. I guess it was saying the partnership ended. Is this the end of it, or is there a way that we can continue that? I know that was a big grant that funded that for quite a few years, so I don't know what we can do to kind of be capturing this data. I mean, it is very consistent over the years, but it's been nice to see kind of the trends over the years as well.
Sure. And I think it kind of leads a little bit to the question Ruthina just asked too, is, and we continue to have these conversations with Sarah and Rachel, and obviously we're going to get to see and work with them some more as we go through our discipline protocols and procedures in the Rethinking Discipline and PBIS group that we have put together around our equity work this year. But we know we have data that can still inform our comprehensive school improvement plans that come from this. So to Ruthina's question about, do we have those full building reports? We may not have those full building reports as we have in the past, but we still have some data we believe we can draw on to use in our improvement efforts. And then the same thing, JP, to your question about, well, what do we do? Well, I think there's a way, as we do anything, that this survey's told us a big story about our school and about our kids and about our staff, and how we need to work better together moving forward. And so I think we need to take that upon us about what can we replicate here moving forward as a consistent touch point for us. And so that'll be some of the work, and what we talked about as they transitioned away with that formalized partnership last year is what kind of capacity we have inside the district to pull something similar off. It's a heavy lift, and I don't want to overpromise before we have all the details about what we can bring back, but we knew that was going to be something that we had to consider moving forward.
If I could add something, I would also say that, while the partnership is kind of known as collecting this data, and that was a really important part of what we were doing with you all for the last 5 years, that was sort of the beginning of the process we used each of the 5 years, where data helped to inform a sort of stakeholder engagement process, which then, led to things like the implicit bias training program and how it was evaluated. Same thing with the LGBT work. That started with an engaged stakeholder, sort of committee that really brought forward a set of recommendations that were based both on the data, but also national research on best practice, and sort of had that inclusive community engagement to come up with what those recommendations were. And then we worked with you all to help sort of implement those recommendations and then evaluate the major programs to see whether or not they were effective. So that's really the whole sort of cycle. So while the data kind of looks pretty and it's exciting to look at, it is kind of, not just the data, it's that it informs your decisions, but also sort of how you implement and evaluate your progress.
Thanks for saying that, Sarah. I think that was an omission on my part, definitely. And, I mean, to just speak to that, I think it talks about some of that work that we're going to be engaged with them through the year, right? We're putting, last year, a big focus was on the DEI plan and having a stakeholder engagement process around that. This year, be on the actual discipline protocols and procedures as we look at that. And so if nothing else, it also taught us a process that's effective for us to look at for improvements, right? That we identify a need, we put together a team, we take those recommendations, we try to implement the recommendations. And then like Sarah said, the other part of the work is then figuring out if the recommendations and the implementations had an impact and had the impact we desired. And so that'll be the process, that was taught to us that we need to continue to work through. And we get to continue to partner with them in some capacity here on this next one.
And I'll say, I also appreciate that this is a collaboration between the University of Iowa and the school district. I just like when we can work together with the folks in our community on these shared goals.
And for anybody, I give credit to the 50 brave souls that are still with us along this meeting. If you're wondering why this topic shows up in a discussion point on transfers, I think to bring it back together, right? If we look at the kind of the building data and compare it to, is there an exodus of people leaving a school and it coincides with not great results from our climate survey, or vice versa, right? We've got, a school is known for doing a very good job in this area and people want to be there. I think that's information that's helpful. Not just as we figure out what a transfer policy would be, but to show that there is an impact beyond just the response to a survey and a number on a graph, right? It's actually making, or if it's actually making students move or not. So that's why we asked for some of this data to come along with the conversation on transfers. I think we need to kind of marry those two things together. To get a bigger picture. I don't know, did you want to have any more conversation on the transfer discussion that we had at the last meeting, Matt? I know we wanted to kind of get it out there that we were talking about different things. I think the gist of it is whether or not we're gonna make all of the secondary the same, right? And which all that entails would be opening up Liberty to going into it, which would be where I was leaning towards. And I would just kind of want to get that out publicly again, so it's out there, because we may be taking a vote on that at our next meeting or fairly soon, if that's what we're going to do. So I think this gives us that opportunity again to have the public hear what our thoughts are on that process.
Yeah, our recommendation to you last time regarding the secondary transfers was to have that campus treated the same as our others as far as transfers and open enrollment opportunities for students outside the district. So I think, like you said, the point was to have it on here again so the community was informed, and then probably anticipate some action by the board at the next meeting one way or another about if we're going to keep it the same or if we were going to make that adjustment. So we don't have anything else to present or add unless there's questions the board would like answered.
Just one point on this for me that's informing my thinking is I think the worry I've heard is if we open Liberty up, essentially there will be a lot of wealth moving toward Liberty. But what this data shows is that I think the kids who are choosing to transfer are staying within their geography. And so it doesn't look to me in this data that the wealth is leaving Northwest or Southeast to go to North Central. It looks like folks are just kind of staying closer to home.
And I would also say that the numbers of students actually transferring the tables that I've seen anyway, don't seem to be particularly large. So I wonder, Sean, if you could let me know if I'm, if we're thinking about something that would happen, you know, in 2 or 3 years time, or if they're, that the number of students transferring would actually increase over time, or is that totally unknown?
It's kind of hard to tell, right? To know what the effect's going to be without doing it. I think that the change can happen rather quickly if the change is in fact just opening up Liberty. I think if we were going to close down all the secondary, we'd have to give a lot more lead time on that. But I think you're right. The secondary numbers are a lot smaller. I think when we discussed this with elementary, you know, was it 2 years ago now, a year and a half ago anyway? You know, it's a much bigger number at the elementary level that causes, you know, a bigger impact on staffing and how we allocate those resources. So it is a smaller impact, I think, at the secondary level, for whatever it's worth.
Sean, in that chart last week, I'll just remind you that it was almost twice as many 2 years ago as this past year. So for whatever reason, there were less transfers this year.
All right, before everybody falls asleep, we have one more discussion item, and we're not going to give it its due tonight because I'm going to fall asleep, but I do want to kind of just give it a quick overview. So what we have there is the priorities that we sent off to ISB based on the list that they sent us, right? So it was all their content, their language and whatnot. And what also is attached there is our brochure that is very specific to ICC from last year. And one of the biggest changes we made between previous years and last year was putting a very specific percent on there that was based on our actual numbers in our district. And I think that was a huge positive. So I think we definitely need to do that again. But I want directors and admin team too to kind of think about these, and we don't need to go through them ad nauseum today, but think about the things that we need to just modify or add or remove. I know there was some talk when we were looking at the numbers earlier with Les, right? There might be some things we need to put in there, be very explicit in what we're going to need, because this year is going to be very different in what our needs are as a district than it has been in the past. All those things that are on there from our brochure last year, they're all still needs, right? They didn't go away. We still need all of those things. But we may need some other stuff. So again, I'm not going to make you all spit it all out tonight because we are all kind of groggy. But that would be my ask, is to maybe offline, if all the directors and, you know, Matt and your team, you want to kind of go through there and say, you know, these are good ones, or we could probably drop these off to have another one on there. That would be great. I don't think we want to have any more, you know. I think a smaller number of priorities, nice and concise, works best. We probably have too many already, but I wouldn't want to just keep growing the list. So I'd guess I would throw that out there, everybody think on it. With that being said, does anybody have any like just instant things that they want to see on there, even if you don't have the right exact words?
SSA mental health, chapter 20.
And no vouchers.
All right. That was very concise. I appreciate that, JP and Ruthina.
We got reciprocity last year, you know?
Yeah. Sometimes you get a win. All right. Is everybody okay with kind of leaving that topic in that state? All right. I see some heads nodding. Maybe they're just falling asleep. So we can move on. We have our liaison report. I don't have anything to talk about other than I do appreciate, I think Charlie brought it up, the NESTS meetings that people are going to. I wasn't able to get to this week's, but it's been good to kind of hear from the side of the folks that are trying to be partners with us and the things that they're trying to do to help out our students and the wins that they're having, but the challenges they're facing. So those have been kind of good to hear what's going on there. I did want to ask again, next meeting, I think is our organizational meeting where we'll assign people to things. But before that happens, tomorrow is another DPO meeting. So I was curious if directors were planning on attending the DPO meeting so we don't end up with too many people there tomorrow.
I was planning on attending, but
Yeah,
other people want to go, I can not attend.
I was planning on attending too. So.
Okay, so Lisa and Charlie, was anybody else gonna try and make it tomorrow? All right, then I may try and join and be the third. My schedule's a little more open tomorrow, so I might be able to do that. But with that, we can move on to our agenda setting. So we do have just our regular board stuff with our consent. Not much else on the regular board meeting part. And then there is the organizational meeting, which has kind of all of that housekeeping stuff that we have to do. So we will elect officers and do all of the things we do annually, adopting the policies and things like that. Ahead of that, I think we will try and send out like our spreadsheet of different committees and things like that to let people kind of pick what they want to get assigned to, or at least to a certain degree. And if we don't get it all done, we can probably finish it up at the meeting. But there's quite a few discussion items there, as well as a few action items. So fair amount of stuff again at our next meeting. Maybe not quite as long as this one, but you never know. Does anybody see anything that we need to make sure we get on there or for future meetings?
You know, I'd like to talk about getting a work session around preschool. I think that we all have talked at one time or another, and it's kind of in our legislative priorities, that universal pre-K or preschool with wraparound care is something, a direction we'd like to see the district headed. I think, and it's something that I'm pretty passionate about, I think that to move that forward, the next step would be a work session to talk about really how we figure out what that looks like. So that if we do find ourselves in a position where we can implement a broader preschool program with wraparound care, we are ready to hit the ground running. And I think that there are some opportunities for that. And I just want us to be prepared. And I think the next step may be to work session it, to talk about some concrete steps to move forward, and then push it off to committee work, and then let a committee work it out there. But I would like to put that on sometime in the very near future.
I think that'd be a good step to take. I think it would be a very wise thing to do now.
Very good. Anything else from anyone? All right, I think that brings us to the end.
I'm sorry, before we adjourn, happy birthday, Sean.
Thank you. Couldn't have been any other way. All right, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you, everyone. Go get some sleep and some food. See you
Get
next time.
cake, Sean.
Yeah, I need to find some cake. I got chocolate.